So again, right now is public comment up until 7 o'clock. You have up to 5 minutes to speak on any item not on the agenda. Oh, this is that time. So if you're on Zoom or here in the chambers, you can do that if you wish. Good evening.
Okay, Susan, you remember the tap, the red, the green? I'll push this tap. Turn the video on, so.
Do you need help? There's Michael.
Yeah, I think it's good. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Susan Jacobus. I'm at 1805 North D as here in Fremont. And I've lived here just over 5 years. And one of the things I want to address with you during this open public comment period is the lack of fiscal responsibility being shown when it comes to spending taxpayers and ratepayers' money. One of these areas centers around the council's actions taken in resolving animal control functions required of the city. Late last year, the council set out an RFP to find a replacement animal control sheltering agent for the city. A bid was received that covered both functions out of a cost of about $227,000. The provider was then asked by administration to revise their bid to remove the animal control portion. Bear in mind that when the council passed to do this, the intent was to have all of the services underneath one roof. And I've attended all of your meetings. Haven't missed any in over 5 years. And I did not hear that council had approved this action. Removal was lowered to the cost of about $190,000, facilitating the administration's proposed migration to using community service officers to fulfill animal control functions. This is where the fiscal responsibility comes into view. 2 new community service officers will cost the city about $35,000 plus each, depending on where they come in to the role as, with their position. Grossed up for benefits and taxes amounting to just under $50,000 apiece, or about $100,000 for 2 positions. On top of this cost, officers will require a fully equipped animal control vehicle, plus other expensive equipment. The current code enforcement officer and the 2 new community service officer positions will all require specialized animal control training. With these additional costs, the city is bumping up against $150,000 for services that Forever Home is willing to perform for $37,000 annually. Even if the police department used its existing open police officer headcount and the full-time police officer budget to fund these control officers, and if no one argues that these 3 officer positions may spend only 1/3 of their time in cost doing animal control, the city is still paying considerably more than if they had contracted the animal control from Forever Home. I contend that this is fiscally irresponsible. Even if, well, I would urge the council to reconsider hiring in the use of the community service officers to perform the animal control. Suggest you go back to Forever Home and ask them to honor their original RFP bid, which will save the city more than $100,000 this year alone. Using these funds to raise overall pay for our police officers, even if that means they would need to do their own evidence room inventorying and reports, et cetera, would benefit all. Reconsider your approach to spending city funds would allow higher police officer pay, which in turn would make it easier to hire and keep police officers we pay to train, which comes at a significant cost. This would appear to be the fiscally responsible thing to do, and I ask you to consider it. We have been in need of additional police officers for several years. We've always been told to control the budget and keep it down. And yet we're still running short on police officers and we're still not funding them. They do need the higher pay, and they need additional officers hired sooner than later, and not underneath the guise of control service officer. Thank you.
Thank you. On Zoom, there's a Ray. You can go ahead. Ray, your hand is raised. You can go ahead. Anybody else on Zoom or here in the chambers? We have up until 7 o'clock. Have be able to speak on any item not on the agenda for public comment. Again, we got at 6:53, 7 more minutes of public comment. Those in the chambers or on Zoom have an opportunity to speak up to 5 minutes on items not on the agenda. There's also comment cards available in the chambers if you wish to fill those out. Guys, how are we doing? Got your seats right up front, guys. Again, we got a few minutes left here for public comment. Anybody on Zoom or here in the chambers that would like to speak on any item not on the agenda, have a few minutes to do so. Okay, time is now 7 o'clock. Want to welcome everybody to the chambers and on Zoom. Before we begin, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll now call the Community Development Agency meeting to order of February 23, 2021. The Opens Meeting Act is posted on the rear wall next to the agendas. At this time, we'll have roll call. Please vote for roll call.
Eight council members are present, Mayor.
Thank you. Moving on to public hearing. Item 1, Resolution 2021-001, making a recommendation to the City Council with respect to the declaration of an area within the jurisdiction of the City of Fremont, Nebraska, as blighted and substandard, located approximately south of East Deborah Avenue and north of the BNSF rail between North Broad Street and North Yeager Road. This time we'll have staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, or Mr. Chair, and members of the Community Development Authority. Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. The City of Fremont commissioned JEO to prepare a blight and substandard study of the area that's generally bounded by the abandoned railroad tracks of the south, Yeager Road on the east, the extension of East Deborah on the north, the Burlington Railroad line on the northwest, and lots west of Broad Street, east of the Fremont Golf Club, between the two railroads, as shown on the attached map. The study area contains approximately 291.6 acres, and it contains a mix of agricultural, industrial, and commercial and residential uses. The area has a mix of zoning, including industrial, rural residential, and light industrial. The purpose of the study was to determine whether or not the area meets the statutory requirements for designating it as blighted and substandard, and to recommend the preparation of a redevelopment plan that would provide financial incentives for development. The study did find that the criteria for blight and substandard were met, specifically with the structural condition of the area, the street layout, faulty lot layout, unsanitary or unsafe conditions, deterioration of the site, a diversity of ownership, obsolete platting, endangerment to life and property, combination of those above, and a detriment to public health and safety. The blight totals of those criteria were 10 of the 12 criteria. And for substandard conditions, the criteria that were met included the exterior inspection of the structures, the age of the structures, inadequate provision for ventilation and sanitation, and other substandard conditions. JEO found that the area meets the criteria for designating it as blight and substandard, and staff recommends that you make that finding.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any questions for staff from council? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing on resolution 2021-001. Any comments from the public?
My name is Jennifer Novotny. I live at 1150 East County Road T. I am in this proposed redevelopment area. I take care of my elderly mother. I have a handicapped daughter. My house is paid for. And this is proposing to basically take my house away from me. I will be hard pressed to find anywhere that can accommodate me in this area for the same price point that I bought this property at, being that it is a rural property. I understand that there is blight and damage, but it is not coming from the rural residences. It's coming from the industrial structures that are there. I have questions as to what this means for me as a homeowner if it does pass. I realize that there are laws in place to protect homeowners, but I did not even know this study was being done until I got a letter in the mail. There's pictures of my house on there. There's pictures of my neighbor's residences on there. I have a lot of questions because I was not even informed of this. I understand that there's going to be a flash freeze beef put down the road for me and a metals place put down for me. If this does pass, does the city also plan on compensating us for our homes and removing us from the area? Because if they don't, then our property values just keep deteriorating and our structures keep deteriorating. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
My name is Trent Sitters. I'm an attorney with Klein Williams Law Firm in Lincoln, Nebraska, 233 South 13th Street, Suite 1900. Here representing the redeveloper proposing the project that was referred to, the cold storage facility. Obviously, this is a step that has to be taken under Nebraska's redevelopment statutes. The designation of an area as blighted and substandard is one of the steps that we have to go through to do a redevelopment project. It does not have the effect of specifically making a determination as to any individual property in the area that's studied. It is a determination as to the area as a whole. It allows the city to proceed with these types of redevelopment projects and provide incentives to help redevelop the community. And this allows for an investment in new projects in the area. It does not result in a taking of anybody's property and should not have by itself any effect on an individual property owner's property in the area.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
I just would like,
We can only speak once on each item.
I
Yep.
just have questions about, because he didn't clarify some of the
We
stuff
can
I
only speak
asked
one
about.
time on each item.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Councilman Yerger.
Yeah, I have a comment and a couple of questions, some of which have been addressed partially, but with regards to both speakers here. But one of my observations as I look through the packet material and the pictures, I guess, I would question, what the city's role is in enforcing its various sections of municipal code that may have lent to excessive blight in this area in the first place. A lot of these pictures look like they might have fallen under the purview of code enforcement and should have been attended to perhaps a long time ago. And we don't have to address that tonight. That's just an observation that I had in looking at the pictures that were taken. One of the questions that I did have, which I think has partially been addressed at least, is my understanding of this declaration was that it, in essence, is a first step necessary to clear the way for the cold storage project and perhaps others with regards to applications related to TIF. And I think I'm correct in that regard.
That's correct.
Okay, so the other question that I had, and it's been kind of addressed by a speaker here just this evening, and that is, well, what if any is the actual impact on the residential properties that already exist here in regards to the declaration of blighting and substandard? It's been intimated that perhaps there isn't really any effect. I'd like to hear whether or not the planning director and legal agrees that, yeah, from that perspective, other than perhaps as the area is developed, how it's developed, et cetera, could have secondary effects. But I'm wondering specifically with the characterization of blighted and stuff substandard, what does that do to residential property owners?
It shouldn't at this point do anything to the residential property owners. It's a designation for the broad area that allows economic development incentives to be used in the future if a particular property owner decides to pursue those. We're not taking anybody's property. We're not consolidating anybody's property. It's just a designation for the entire area. I would point out this entire area is shown for industrial uses in the comprehensive plan. The current comprehensive plan, which was undertaken, over 10 years ago. And so it's been anticipated for a long time that this area would develop industrially. And this is a first step in helping facilitate that development in the future. There's absolutely nothing in the Blight and Substandard study that says those individuals need to relocate.
And maybe you could educate me and the participants that were here speaking tonight as to, there is certainly a benefit here for industrial and commercial users relative to the blighting because they have access to state governance over TIF and those kind of things. Are there mechanisms that are available that we need to be refreshed on related to residential? Do they have any recourse or opportunity as a result of the change in characterization?
Ultimately, when it comes to the redevelopment of that property, yes, they would.
Okay.
But as it specifically relates to residential property in this area, the future land use for this area is industrial and not rural residential.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from council? Seeing none, I would take a motion in regards to this item. Councilman Yerger,
Move approval of resolution 2021-001.
Councilman Sukram,
Second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Oh, my fault. We'll take a motion to adjourn. I'm rushing ahead of here. Councilman Gibson,
I made the motion to adjourn.
thank you. Councilman Jensen,
I will second.
cast your votes to adjourn CDA meeting.
Carries 8-0, Mayor.
Now we're adjourned in the CDA meeting. I will now open the city council regular meeting of February 23, 2021 to order. The Opens Meeting Act is posted on the rear wall next to the agendas. This time we'll have roll call.
Please cast your vote for roll call. 8 council members are present, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, next item is mayor's comments. So tonight it is my pleasure. I have some guests here with us. So go ahead and come up. Fremont High School bowling team, come up, please. Give them a round of applause. Go ahead and turn around, guys. Show your beautiful faces, all right? So I wanted to bring them here today to introduce them. This team right here was the first state championship bowling team in NSAA history. So right here in Fremont, Nebraska, these guys. So we have Chris Emmons, Cooper Phillips, Nate Steinmates, Cole Malcuso, and then Alex Reeson here, as well as Coach Keith Cunnings and assistant coach Mark McKenzie. So again, these guys had a fantastic season. They are state champs. They've been bowling together for 9 years. And tonight I wanted to bring them here and honor them because they deserve it. So give them another round of applause, all right? We've got to get a photo off, right? All right. Congratulations. Way to go. Great job. Great job. Thanks for being here. Great job. Absolutely. Good luck in the future, all right? Great job. All right. Thanks again, guys, for being here. You don't have to stick around. Very good. Couple other awards tonight. So we have the February 2021 Service Awards. So the first person I'd like to recognize is Mark Peterson. Mark has had 45 years of service. He was hired in 1976 as a gas pipeline welder, promoted to a gas service worker in 2008. Mark here tonight. All right. Next is Brandon Labasher, 5 years of service. He was hired in 2016 as a safety manager for the city of Fremont. Is Brandon here tonight? And then finally is Brianna Quant Ryan, 5 years of service as a police officer for the city of Fremont. So congratulations to all February 2021 service awards. And there you go. Very good. That's all for my comments tonight. We'll be moving on to item 1. Motion to adopt current agenda for the February 23, 2021 regular meeting. Is there any changes from staff or from council regards to the agenda? Councilman Yerger.
Yes, I have 2 requests. I'd like to have item 25 moved to ahead of consent agenda. And I'd also like to make a motion to continue items 6 through 11 of the public hearing to a special council and/or joint planning commission meeting where a more extensive UDC rewrite discussion and debate can occur between and among council members, the planning commissioners, and/or the public.
Okay. Is there any other changes before I address those?
Mayor, Councilmember Yerger, this really isn't the time for a continuance. This is just for adopting the agenda.
I beg your pardon, sir. But having been subject to this particular approach in the past, this is exactly what has happened previously. These are items that are on the agenda. We're asking to move. I'm asking to move these items to another meeting session. It's no different than rearranging the order, and that's the way it's been handled
So do you-
historically.
Then we should probably take them one at a time then.
We didn't do that the last time either. We
Just-
took several items off
that's-
of the agenda that were mine, moved them
Well,
to,
no, the
moved them to continue, and they were continued.
moving of the items for one motion and then the continuing the items for another motion.
So we have 2 motions.
That's
I
the
don't
way-
I don't have a place to move them other than,
No, I mean, you want number 25 moved.
I want
so we can-
25 moved
Let's,
to ahead of consent, and I'd like items 6 through 11 continued to another meeting.
so let's handle that as 2 separate ones.
Yes.
That's what I would
Oh,
recommend.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay. All right. The first, we'll deal with the first one, and that's moving item 25 ahead of consent agenda. So Councilman Yerger, is that a motion?
Yes, it is.
Is there a second? Councilman Legband?
That,
Okay, cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Okay, we'll now address 25 ahead of consent agenda. The next would be moving items in the public hearing 6 through 11. Is that correct? Is that the right numbers? 6 through 11 to a special meeting? Would that be a study session or a?
We could continue it to the next meeting and then call a special meeting if that's necessary. But there's no special meeting that's been called. So.
Okay. So I guess the motion would be to take items 6 through 11 and continue them. Councilman Yerger, is that a motion for that?
yes, it is.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Councilman Ellis?
I'll second.
Thank you. Cast your votes.
The motion fails 3-5.
And any other changes from council? Moving on to public hearings. Oh, we need to approve the agenda as written. Okay. Yep, thank you. We do need to now have I need a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Councilman Jensen,
I'll make the motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Councilman Legban,
I will second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Thank you. Now moving on to public hearings. Item 2, resolution 2021-023 of the city council declaring an area within the jurisdiction of the city of Fremont, Nebraska as blighted and substandard, located approximately south of East Deborah Avenue and north of the BNSF rail between North Broad Street and North Yeager Road. This time we'll have staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is the City Council action on the blight and substandard study that you just took as a Community Development Authority. In the interest of time, we have a long agenda. I won't repeat the entire staff report, but I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Councilman Yerger.
I had one question I didn't ask the last time. So is any of this ground currently being farmed as productive farm ground today?
I don't know the answer to that question. I believe that there had been some farming on the property to the north. But I don't know the specific crop that it would have been in.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for staff? We'll now open the public hearing on resolution 2021-023. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Councilwoman Ganem.
No, I'd certainly like to thank Jennifer Dam for answering all my questions earlier. And certainly I was concerned about the residents who were there, and there are some viable businesses there, and they will not be impacted, and they do qualify for improving certainly their properties if they choose to take advantage of that, and that will just enhance the area. And there is agricultural land there that is being produced, look like corn in some of the areas, but I don't know either the crop. However, when we say, is that blighted? That whole area is basically underdeveloped, and there are some blighted areas. And yet, if you turn around and you look at the south side of the street, there's an iLegacy there, there's some buildings going on. And for some of that development, it had been determined that it was blighted. I don't know about my legacy property, but some of the others had been, so that they could qualify for development. And it is an area that was determined for development and could certainly be used for development in our city, and that would be enhancing everything. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from council? Seeing none, I would take a motion in regards to this item. Councilman Legban,
The motion to approve resolution 2021-023.
Councilwoman Ganem,
Second,
cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 3, ordinance 5555, amending ordinance number 5427 as it pertains to the zoning map to rezone the property generally described as located on the west side of Yeager Road, approximately 880 feet south of Highway 30, from R rural to PD plan development. This would be to introduce and have first reading. This time we'll have staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This piece of property is at the far north end of the area that was just declared blighted and substandard. The request is for a planned development for general industrial type uses. It's for a plant that will have cold storage and frozen storage for meat products. The future comprehensive plan, or the comprehensive plan, designates the future land use in the area as industrial. The reason for the planned development is to exceed the height that's allowed in the GI district. You can do that through a planned development. The maximum height in the GI district is 60 feet. They are proposing a structure of 130 feet. And if you look, there's an elevation of the building at the back of the staff report. They're also requesting a reduction in the required landscaping. That's because this will be a USDA facility handling meat products. And as I understand it, extensive landscaping can harbor rodents and other insects. The facility is expected to create 51 jobs with an average salary of $42,000. The capital investment is $40 million. The Planning Commission voted 8-0 to recommend approval to this change of zone.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Councilman Yerger?
I'm wondering if at some point here you could elaborate on the zoning application and the references that are herein with regards to other aspects of supplemental regulations applicable to general industrial are going to need to be addressed as well. And I'm wondering what those are. Are they just the perimeter landscaping things that you referenced, or are there others?
It's the perimeter landscaping and the height.
Just those two?
And if you look at the supplement, the application narrative, it specifies what the requirements are in that district and that would go along with this particular project.
Are all of these modifications specific only to this PD and this PD zoning? They don't apply to any future PDs, is that correct?
That's correct. It would just be for this piece of property.
And as I understand the reading, the county will be required to pave Yeager Road as a condition of annexation?
That's my understanding. Is
Okay.
that's working through the redevelopment plan or annexation?
That'll be through the redevelopment plan.
And a redevelopment plan will be coming forward end of March, I believe. Okay.
Okay. So the other lingering question I had, and I know we've had a little bit of discussion about this, but I just want to be clear. So when we get to the point of, we're changing the zoning and then we're going to get on with annexation or whatever as part of what we're doing here. County Road T currently is maintained by the county. And is that road going to be improved, that is paved as a part of any of this rezoning application or forbearance by the county as having this in their zone? And if not, does that not put the potential cost of paving that street at some point in time on the city?
As a part of the change of zone, the request does not include the paving of County Road T.
But once it's annexed as a part of after the rezone, we'll be moving to that phase. And once annexed, it becomes the obligation of the city. Is that
Once it's annexed, only that portion that's the farthest west becomes the city's responsibility. The remaining portion between Yeager Road and that piece that comes down is still the county's
We
responsibility.
don't need to deal with it right here on the rezoning. I can ask those questions under annexation. They're probably more appropriate there anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I'd open a public hearing. An ordinance 5555. Any comments from the public?
Trent Sitters with Klein Williams representing the redeveloper on this project. 233 South 13th Street, Lincoln, Nebraska, Suite 1900, 68508. And as was mentioned, the request is for a planned development district to apply specifically to this project, not to anywhere else in the city. And very few modifications from the underlying zoning district associated with this. So really focusing on the height of the facility and the zoning, the landscaping requirements. Part of that is also a result of the size of the facility and the neighboring property. Having a lot of buffer along the railroad line on the side of the property also didn't make a lot of sense from a redevelopment perspective, but happy to answer any questions you might have about that.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Councilman Yerger.
I move approval of ordinance 5555. First reading. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion to introduce and hold first reading. Is there a second? Councilman Coons? Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
We'll now have first reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending ordinance number 5427 as it pertains to the zoning map to rezone the property generally described herein on the west side of Yeager Road, approximately 880 feet south of Highway 30, Dodge County, Nebraska, from R rural to PD plan development, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on first reading.
Thank you. Moving on to item 4. Ordinance 5556, annexing by voluntary petition property generally described as tax lots 33, 35, 37, and a portion of tax lot 48, along with lots 2 and 4, block 2, LJ Abbott subdivision. This would be to introduce and hold first reading. We'll have staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is a request to annex the property that is described as tax lots 35, 37, part of tax lot 48, lots 2 and 4, block 2, LJ Abbott subdivision, all located in section 2, township 17 north, range 8 east. The map and legal description are attached to the staff report. The parcels are contiguous with the city limits. The request meets the requirements of the UDC and state statutes. And the Planning Commission voted 7-0 with 1 abstention due to a conflict of interest to recommend conditional approval of the annexation. I would note that the applications are asking that the annexation be conditioned upon the approval of the change of zone that you just voted on. The designation as blighted and substandard, the approval of a redevelopment plan, and then, of course, closing on the property for the redevelopment. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any questions for staff? Councilman Yerger?
It's also sort of contingent on the truck washes consenting and obtaining the county approval to leave the industrial area.
That's all been approved.
That's all been approved.
That was all approved on December 29th.
Okay. And so I'm going to reiterate my question then that comes along with this, because I know the parcel that's being developed here doesn't go all the way down to County Road T. So it's kind of an odd question in the sense that, but yes, as we're looking now at annexation, County Road T comes into play. And so I am concerned ultimately with annexation, the city takes over authority over the roads with inherent in that. And so that road is not paved. It's hard surfaced, I guess. Is that correct, Brian? It's hard surfaced. They said they would maintain it for a while, but we're going to be putting the cold storage truck traffic and other truck traffic on that road. So I am concerned relative to the expense of having to subsequently pave that street now that it's becoming, with annexation, an obligation of the city. And I don't know if Brian, if you or anyone can address that. There's nothing with regards to our agreements with county or anything like this that
No.
comes into play.
That still remains a county road. So the county's responsible. It's not likely that we'll end up annexing down. Remember, you only have to take the road if your property that you're annexing touches it. So as Jennifer explained, the segment of property of Yeager along Yeager that touches Compound Holdings property, that becomes city's responsibility, but nothing else. The rest of it remains in the county.
The piece of County Road T that touches the car wash, there is a piece there, right?
It's not the car wash, the truck wash.
The truck wash, excuse
Yeah,
me.
that's
truck
on,
wash.
that's on Kathy
Yeah,
Drive.
it's on Kathy.
So it
no,
doesn't
The,
touch
the
either?
Yount
No.
property, which
Okay.
is
No.
agricultural or vacant in nature, that's what touches County Road T.
Yeah,
Okay, so we don't have anything
We don't-
engaged here on County Road T, but it will
Nope.
be part of the annexation.
nope.
It stays county
it's-
forever?
It
until-
stays county until we would annex further south. We're not
Okay,
touching. T.
Thank you. That clarification helps. Thank you very
Yep.
much.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing on ordinance 5556.
Trent Sitters representing the redeveloper once again. Just a couple of quick comments to follow up. As Jennifer noted, it is the request that this be conditional on those closing items relating to the acquisition of the property and the redevelopment of that. The plan for the redeveloper's perspective is to close as quickly as they can in April after all of the required steps are made. They have an aggressive timeline for the construction on this project. And, they anticipate, if all goes well with these matters, that the project would be up and running within a year. And I think from the time that the redeveloper has provided information on the project, the size has grown in terms of the investment that they're going to be making at the site. Jennifer mentioned earlier a $40 million investment. It's currently looking like that will be $75 to $80 million of investment in that site. Not creating a larger facility, but creating a more efficient facility from some of the earlier discussions. So again, happy to answer any questions you might have from that perspective.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Seeing none, I would take a motion to introduce and hold first reading. Councilman Jensen.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to introduce and hold first reading of ordinance 5556.
Councilman Yerger,
Second Benson's motion.
cast your votes.
The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 5. Oh, thank you. We'll have first reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, annexing by voluntary petition property generally described as tax lot 33, 35, 37, and a portion of tax lot 48, along with lots 2 and 4, block 2, LJ Abbott subdivision, all located in section 2, township 17 north, range 8, east of the 6 PM Dodge County, Nebraska, and extending the corporate limits to include said real estate, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on first reading.
Thank you, Tyler. Moving on now to item 5, resolution 2021-024, approving a conditional use permit for the expansion of a non-standard use to allow the construction of an 807 square foot addition into the required side yard at 705 North I Street for the Salvation Army. This time we'll have staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is a request to add on to the existing Salvation Army building, and it would result in a 3-foot side yard. The Salvation Army does own the properties to the north, the other 2 properties that go to the end of the block. The middle property has a life estate, so the individual who lives there is allowed to live there as long as they want to, or until they pass away. Once that person no longer resides at that property, the Salvation Army intends to tear down that property and the house to the north and combine them into one lot, at which point there won't be an issue with the side yard setback. The property is zoned suburban commercial. The Planning Commission held a public hearing last week on February 15th. They voted 8-0 to recommend approval. And this does meet the requirements of section 11-324 of the UDC. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Councilman Yerger,
I just really have one question. I'm curious, when I looked at your zoning map, are there any other suburban commercial operations in this area? Because everything that surrounds this, other than for the Salvation Army, which would cause it to be suburban commercial, I suppose, everything is UR or AR. So is there anything along Military on either side of the street that
There-
set this in motion for suburban commercial in the first place when UDC went into play?
I don't know why this was zoned suburban commercial. I don't know the history going back. I'm assuming or presuming that there was commercial zoning on this property prior to the UDC. If you look at, there are several areas in town along Military, Bell Street, Broad Street, where there are residential uses that are commercially zoned. And that's something that I really want to see us take a deep dive into looking at what's appropriate as we move forward with the update of the UDC. But it's not unusual to see residential uses that have commercial zoning.
Sure. I have other comments, but I'll wait till after public comment.
All right, any other comments? Councilman Jensen?
I see we have some members from the Salvation Army here. I just wanted to ask a couple things quick. I live like 4 blocks from that area, so I'm a little bit familiar with it. Your property directly to the north is a pretty nice property. Question one, is that, how long do you expect that to be occupied? And the next property to the north that you also own is not occupied. I fielded some concerns about how long that's going to be allowed to stand as it is before anything's done on it. I seen in the packet that it's scheduled for demolition sometime in 2021. Is there a time frame for that?
Yeah, before you start, I'll officially open the public hearing. So we're there. Go ahead, state your name and address, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is William Stott. I am an architect with the architectural offices in Omaha, Nebraska, 4610 Dodge Street, Omaha. And I am the representative, I'm representing the Salvation Army in this project. We also have Major Adam Moore and Lieutenant Rod Morin here as well, if they have further questions for them. But I would like to address that question or address the question and add on to what Jennifer said earlier. The Salvation Army owns the property in question, the property directly to the north, and the property to the north of that, taking them all the way back to the North Street. There is a plan, a master plan to develop and expand the functions and services of the Salvation Army all the way up. It is at this point in a holding pattern. The property directly to the north was sold to the Salvation Army with the condition that the previous owner be allowed to live there as long as he chooses. So that's really the timeline for the master plan. One other thing of note, there is a vacant building, 2 properties to the north. That property has always been considered part of this master plan to expand the kitchen for the Salvation Army, which is what is driving this request, to be able to serve the community better, both people in need, but also before and after school and summer programs for the youth. The property to the north needs to be torn down, and it's always been linked to that, but we haven't been able to develop the property because of the constraints of the side yards and setbacks. So that's the reason for the conditional use permit. The property to the north has then been broken from that existing schedule. It is actually under contract right now with Doyle Acker, someone from the community here who's going to be tearing it down imminently. And as soon as weather breaks and they're able to schedule it, that property will be demolished.
Thank you.
And
That was
with
my
that, I'd be happy to answer any more questions.
Any questions for the applicant? Councilman Jensen?
Nope.
Any other comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Councilman Yerger.
Yes, as a result of what was in our packet and what we just heard this evening, I would like to propose an amendment or modification to the resolution, actually two of them. I'd like to see a whereas statement added to the resolution that says, whereas the Salvation Army has agreed to the 2021 demolition of the northernmost residential property located at 749 I Street, owned by the Salvation Army. And then in the now be it therefore resolved statement, I would add at the end of that paragraph, contingent on the Salvation Army's demolition of the property located at 749 I Street. I think it's in concert with what we heard their plan is anyway. It's in concert with the request from the area neighbors. And it just puts in motion the fact that that's going to happen as a condition of the permit.
Councilwoman Ganem.
I would second that.
Okay. That was a motion formally.
Oh,
Okay.
is that not a motion yet?
Legal, were we good with his description? Are you good with just language there?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so we have a motion
Yes.
and a second. Is there any other comments from council before I go to vote? Councilman Legman?
Yeah, I just want to know if the Salvation Army is okay with this. I know their plans and they seem to be okay, but I want, we're throwing stuff at them that their legal hasn't even had a chance to look at. I want to make sure it's all right with them.
Bill Stott, the architectural offices, again, they have no problem with that amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Vote, any other comments before we vote, council? Seeing none, cast your votes on the amendments.
Motion carries 7-1, Mayor.
Now I would take a motion in regards to the amended resolution 2021-024. Councilman Jensen.
I will make the motion to approve amended resolution 2021-024.
Councilman Yerger,
Second, Councilman Jensen's motion.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
All right, moving on now to item 6. Ordinance 5557, amending Exhibit B of Ordinance 5427, specifically to Table 11-502.02, institutional recreation and amusement uses of the Unified Development Code to add the use personal campsite. This would be to introduce and hold first reading. This time we'll have staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. I believe that Jackie Wells from House Hill Levine is on the call, and she does have a presentation prepared for these following amendments. So I will let her take the lead on these, and I will answer whatever questions or provide supplemental information as needed.
Good evening, everyone. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Thank you so much for having us here this evening and for considering these expedited zoning amendments before we get into the larger UDC update. So starting with agenda item number 6, ordinance 5557. So this is to amend Exhibit B of ordinance 5427, table 11-502.02, the institutional recreation and amusement uses, to add the use of a personal campsite, which is highlighted here in light green on the table. So this expedited amendment comes out of the need to expand the allowance for camping within the city on personal privately owned property to allow up to 2 camping units on a personal campsite. So this would have that listed as a permitted use in the R district.
I would add to this. This is tied with a couple of amendments as they move forward. The use specific conditions that are in 11-504.02, and then also with the definitions. The reason that this is coming about, as you may recall, There have been a number of conditional use permit requests for campsites on properties that are either on the lakes or by the river that have flooded. And individuals have wanted to continue to use those properties. But because they're in the floodway or the floodplain, they've wanted to use a camper instead of building a unit that's elevated, or in the case of the floodway, they can't build a unit at all. This distinguishes these three different proposals, distinguish between a commercial campground, which is multiple units, and somebody who just wants to have a campsite on their own property. So that's why this is being brought forward, so that the couple individuals that we've had come forward have had to pay the fee just to have a camper on their own personal property, where in the past they would have been able to build a cabin. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Jackie, are you finished on that item with your
Yes.
comments? Okay. Any questions for staff? Councilman Legband?
I'm reading these all right. These are just basically cleanups.
That's
And
correct.
So that when we get to start looking at the new UDC, we know what we're talking about here. It's
Right, we're
cleanup.
trying to do simple things at this point, and then we're going to do a much deeper dive with all of the rest of the UDC as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Yerger?
Yeah, so I'm going to backtrack and go back through a little history to make sure I understand where we are. I think I do, but just for clarity. Several months ago, when we had conversation about changes to the UDC, city legal said specifically we weren't going to make any changes. We made some changes in the glossary, for example, on the parking issue for the Borisall properties, as you'll recall. And we didn't go back and change any of the master text in the UDC because we, quote, weren't going to make any changes to the UDC till rewrite. Now, since we've hired a consultant to do the rewrite function, we have indicated that we would have we take advantage of some expedited changes, which I guess we're looking at tonight, relative to getting pre-approval, if you will, from the council to make changes that we would otherwise not have made based on the legal position that was given to us earlier. Is that correct?
I'm not sure that it was a legal position, but
I was told specifically by Mr. Sullivan, we weren't going to rewrite section 11,600 or whatever. We rewrote 11.
Right, our goal
9.
is to do this in an orderly fashion. So we're trying to pick the low-hanging fruit here, and then dive deeply into the rest of the ordinance later on.
And I understand that.
So that's the goal. As we move forward, before the full rewrite of the ordinance, there are likely to be other requests that come forward. I mean, that's the nature of zoning.
Right.
But the goal here is just to get that low-hanging fruit.
Right. And so one of the things that we're doing here is changing a lot of the table definitions and determining whether they're permitted, conditional, limited, et cetera. I understand. But one of the things that's not yet being considered, and I guess I hope it's on the radar screen of the consultant, and that is whether or not the zoning categories that are in the present UDC are even going to stand as the zoning categories. For example, we have had some discussion in the past as to whether or not the R, SR, AR, UR, et cetera, for residential would stand, or whether we might go back to something that's more akin to the R1, R4 that we had before. That was more prohibitive as to where you can place commercial and industrial up against residential property. And that's not happened, but it still could happen. Is that right? Even though we're not fixing it in the tables yet?
We absolutely need to take a look at all of our land uses. And you've got in the AR, SR, UR, 5 different types of residential land uses that are allowed under different criteria. And for single family uses, there's 4 different lot sizes, but there's no real designation of how you interpret those lot sizes. And there's nothing that really pertains to the older part of town.
Right.
We need to look at all of that.
Right. And we'll be doing that. I understand.
We absolutely will be.
Okay. So my other question then is, as we look at this material and what was attached in our packet under this agenda item, there are a lot of definitions. And I know that those definitions not only apply to this particular item on the agenda, they also apply to other items that are on the agenda because it's in the glossary area. So my question to you tonight is, as we're going through these, is it appropriate to ask definition questions now or save them all to the latter? Because I do have some questions based on what's attached in this packet, but I don't see that they necessarily tie in to directly to the campground issue. And I can hold those. And should I hold those?
Yeah,
Okay.
we set this up and it goes consecutively as you would go through the UDC. And so the definitions are in section 11-900, which is at the
At the
end.
end. Okay.
So if
So let me just ask this question because I think it is relevant to the campground issues. There's a definition here for transient lodging services, excuse me, and a definition for personal campgrounds. And I'm wondering if the term transient in both of those definitions is in concert or in conflict with each other. And I would ask, you don't have to fix it tonight necessarily, but it may be something that needs to be looked at as to whether or not those two definitions are going to be appropriate in the glossary relative to this item and some
I think
subsequent
it's
ones.
okay. One of the problems in the UDC right now, if you look through the land use tables, we have transient lodging services and non-transient lodging services with the exact same definition and uses. So our purpose was to get rid of the non-transient lodging services and just have the transient lodging services and to clarify what that meant. So transient lodging services would be hotels, motels, Airbnbs, bed and breakfast, traditional bed and breakfast and the like. Jackie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, so the cleanup for the transient and the non-transient lodging services was exactly what Jennifer had mentioned. The definitions were similar. The use-specific provisions were exactly the same. And frankly, non-transient lodging services, the term didn't match the definition of a hotel or a motel as transient and non-transient, really doesn't apply to a motel or hotel type of use. So yeah, the proposal there is to eliminate the non-transient lodging services use altogether, and then to clarify the definition of transient lodging services to make it more useful
I see my
for
time's
hotels.
expired. Could I just follow up with one question? So in the personal campsite definition where it refers to transient lodging for transient lodging,
The intent
if I
there,
take that back and read that into the definition of transient lodging services,
two different uses. The use of the word transient occupancy in this case means it's not for permanent occupancy.
okay. Thank
So
you.
if you want to change that to
That's fine. I
temporary,
just wanted to be
it'd
clear.
be
Thank-
fine.
Any other comments for staff? Now open the public hearing. Ordinance 5557. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Councilman Yurger.
One last question that I didn't get in. So this particular ordinance change only appears to affect the R zoning category. Is that correct? Thanks.
Councilman Coons.
Make a motion to introduce and hold the first reading of ordinance 5557.
Councilman Legban,
And I will second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
We'll now have first reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending Exhibit B of Ordinance 5427, specifically portions of the UDC Chapter 11, zoning subdivision and site development, Exhibit B, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on first reading.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7. Ordinance 5558, amending Exhibit B of Ordinance 5427, specifically Table 11-502.03, commercial uses to add car wash, delete non-transient lodging services, add restaurant, drive-through, and add kennels, to small animal boarding facilities. This would be to introduce and hold first reading. We'll have staff report.
Mayor and members of the city council, Jennifer Dam and Jackie Wells. And Jackie, I'll let you take the lead.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right. Go ahead and share my screen again. So here we have the table 11-502.03. You can see that car wash has been added as a separate use. It's currently regulated under service station. So since car washes do exist separately from service stations, wanting to allow these as their own primary use. So they're conditional in the SC, limited in the GC, limited in the LI, and permitted in the GI districts. We're also proposing that the non-transient lodging services be removed, as we discussed during the last agenda item. This is really to help clarify the difference between the non-transient and transient lodging services, since those were defined and regulated in the exact same way. Going down to the restaurant drive-through, we can see that this has been added as a conditional use in the GC and in the PD district. So currently drive-throughs are not regulated for restaurants. They're not addressed in the code aside from a stacking space requirement that's included in the parking section. So wanting to include those to allow that in certain areas in the city, and then to also establish some additional use provisions that we'll go over here in the next couple agenda items. And then last but not least, adding kennels to the small animal boarding facilities. So this wouldn't change how small animal boarding facilities are permitted in the community. It would just be adding kennels to that use as well. And that's to address a recent proposal that I believe you all are addressing again tonight as well.
Thank you, Jackie. Any questions for staff? Councilman Yerger.
Yes, so I'm assuming that some of the changes that we're seeing here are being proposed for car wash will help us with the like problems that we had and discussed relative to the 23rd Street car wash as we develop
That's the intent.
some further restrictions. So I assume that I would see that. I am curious as to if we're deleting non-transient services from the tables. I'm curious as to why it appears we're not taking the definition completely out of the glossary.
It should be.
Okay, I don't think that it was, and so you might make note of that. And the other question that I wanted just to be clear on. So based on what we're doing with the insertion of kennels, it doesn't appear that what we're doing here allows any residential homes in the city to be a kennel. Because where we put these in the table are in essence listed as they're allowed in rural as a condition, and then they're only allowed in
Commercial,
general commercial as a limited use. And so we
Correct.
won't run into an issue relative to the changes that we're making, that anyone can come and apply for a kennels license anywhere in town. That's not what we're doing. And this doesn't get us into hot water relative to that. We've been clear that's not our goal.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing on ordinance 5558. Any comments from the public?
Good evening, Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street here in Fremont, Nebraska. I did have a few questions in regards to the small animal boarding facility, all the blue line that you guys received. One of them that I saw, number 4, the facility shall have appropriate drains and other physical elements to properly dispose of clean waste from the boarding area. I think most facilities will have their own method of cleaning, and I don't believe you want everything going down into a drain system. I would suggest that you amend that to say or, so it will be their choice of how to clean when it comes to kennel, because they are regulated by state and the cleanliness, et cetera. And I am sure that they will use one method or the other to remove appropriately the waste required. And then as far as the must be air conditioned, and you're required to have all doors and windows closed 100% of the time. And I'm not sure why that is. There hasn't been any issues with any of the kenneled areas close or proximal to residential so far. I'm not really sure why you would even have that requirement in an ordinance. And as far as outdoor areas should be set back as far as possible from all residential properties. There's a minimal amount of time that these dogs or cats or whatever will be in the outside areas. And you're already limiting in another paragraph between 10 and 7 a.m. So I'm not really sure why there's any consideration of the setback being at least 150 feet. Because that's like if you're in my neighborhood, other than mine, which is 100 by 160 feet, most lots are 50 feet wide. You're asking it to be 3 homes away, which if this is in a suburban commercial area or a downtown area, may border on a residential area that'll be closer and more proximal than that. And as far as some of this is rather open-ended, adequate precautions been taken on behalf of the operator not to create an undue burden on neighboring properties via traffic, parking, and noise. That's a little subjective. However, there are some nuances here that I think you could be changing. Number 7 would be one of them. After each use of the area, so if a dog goes out, I would maybe amend that to daily cleanup rather than constant. I don't know how many of you have animals. I have 3 dogs and I do not pick it up every time one of my dogs goes outside. But when the weather's not frozen over, it's daily. And I would think that they could do the same regardless of who the operator is. And again, that's something that falls under state regulations. So there's some amendments that could be used or better utilized here to the benefit of the kennel operator. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
Mr. Mayor, I would
Yes.
point out that this is just for the table and not for the use specific conditions. That's 2 items down the line. So if we look at those comments in another couple items.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Seeing none, I take a motion to introduce and hold first reading. Ordinance 5558. Councilman Legban.
Make a motion to introduce and hold first reading of ordinance number 5558.
Councilman Coons,
I'll second that motion.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Now have introduce and hold first reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending Exhibit B of Ordinance 5427, specifically portions of the UDC Chapter 11, zoning, subdivision, and site development, Exhibit B, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on first reading.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8, ordinance 5559, amending Exhibit B of Ordinance 5427, specifically sections 11-504.02, use specific provisions to revise the provisions for campground and add personal campsite. And this would be to introduce and hold first reading. I'll have staff report.
Mayor, members of the city council, Jennifer Dam and Jackie Wells. Jackie?
Thank you, Jennifer. Go ahead and share my screen again. So here we have the proposed revised provisions for campground, and then the next side we have those for personal campsite. So here the campground use specific standards have been updated just for cleanup. So they've been revised to have more consistency in numbering and grammar and capitalization, et cetera. So no major content changes are proposed here for campground. Moving into the personal campsite. So these would be the use specific provisions that would apply to the new personal campsite use that is proposed to be permitted in the R district. So there are 5 requirements that personal campsites would have to meet the standards of. So the first one is addressing the front yard setback. So ensuring that it is of a similar setback to any adjacent buildings or residences if those exist. Ensuring that there is a minimum square footage for the camping unit. So the camping unit would be the camper, the tent, any type of related, camping structure where, one household or one individual would be able to stay. A maximum of 2 camping units would be permitted per lot. They would still have to meet that minimum square footage requirement per camping unit, but a maximum of 2 would be allowed per lot. And then the next one restricts the time period for which a camping unit can be occupied throughout the year. So it's 180 continuous days, really to accommodate the warmer weather months. And then last but not least, no porches, lean-tos, or additions shall be constructed onto or immediately adjacent to a camping unit. So this ensures that they really stay temporary in nature.
Thank you, Jackie. Any questions for staff? Councilman Yerger?
And this one generically, it was precipitated by some of the discussion we had on Emerson Estates.
Emerson Estates and also the 2 units out at the Rod and Gun Club. And let's see, Bryson was more of a commercial type campground, but then I think Weesey was applying for a couple of campers for his kids. So those are the items that precipitated this.
Thanks.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any other comments from council? Seeing none, I would take a motion to introduce and hold first reading. Councilman Jensen?
I'll make the motion to introduce and hold first reading of ordinance 5559.
Councilman Coons?
I'll second that motion.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
We'll now introduce and hold first reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending Exhibit B of Ordinance 5427, specifically portions of the UDC Chapter 11 zoning subdivision and site development Exhibit B, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on first reading.
Moving on to item 9, ordinance 5560, amending Exhibit B of ordinance 5427, specifically section 11-504.03, use specific provisions to add restaurant drive-through, car wash, and to revise service station and small animal boarding facility / kennel, and to strike non-transient lodging services. This would be to introduce and hold first reading. We'll have staff report.
Good evening again. Jennifer Dam, Planning Director, and Jackie Wells. Jackie, I'll let you discuss this.
Thank you, Jennifer. So yeah, we're going to go through the use-specific provisions that are proposed to be added for restaurant drive-through and car wash, revised for service station and small animal boarding facility / kennel, and those that are proposed to be eliminated for the non-transient lodging services. So jumping right in to the restaurant drive-through, the proposed standards here would first and foremost provide an allowance for menu boards. So a proposed total of 4 maximum are proposed to be allowed for a drive-through. So that would include menu boards and the pre-order menu boards, and could accommodate multiple drive-through lanes if those were to be proposed or included. It includes a restriction for noise beyond the boundaries that might come from the speaker or the intercom that's associated with the drive-through. Next, we have a requirement that if the drive-through were to have a canopy, it would have to have a uniform and consistent roof line with the building to which it's associated. Next, we get into our stacking spaces and lane requirements. So ensuring that they don't impede any on-site traffic or pedestrian movements, that they're separated from the parking areas, that they be provided with a bypass lane. and that they have a minimum depth and width as established here. So
Thank you.
next we'll move it. I'm sorry.
I've got a couple of comments. First, drive-through restaurants are currently excluded from the UDC. So that's clearly an oversight. Drive-through restaurants are currently excluded from the UDC. When you look at the use specific regulations under restaurants, it says excluding drive-through restaurants. So we wanted to make sure that those are available to the community. And then secondly, on the small animal boarding facility / kennel, we are striking several of the current regulations. Currently, dog runs are not allowed within 300 feet of any residential property. The Humane Society is in violation of that with Deerfield to the south. The type C buffer yard screening is eliminated, and instead an opaque wall or fence is required. And then currently it's different by different districts and where the dog runs are allowed. And currently the use has to be in a fully enclosed building, which is designed with noise resistant materials, etc. Those are stricken and rewritten to be a little more streamlined. And that's what the intent of this is. This does allow council to reduce the area between a kennel and a residential use if it's a particularly noisy area from that 150 feet to a smaller distance. So there is flexibility that's provided. And again, the hours of 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. are to provide reasonable guidelines for any operator who's seeking a conditional use permit.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing on ordinance 5560. Any comments from the public?
Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street here in Fremont, Nebraska. I guess Jennifer had commented that my comments were a little early. And again, I would reiterate that you consider changing the word "and" on bullet point number 4 under kennels to the word "or," something simple. It will still be something that each kennel would have to address, and it's regulated by state for cleanliness and hygiene. And also perhaps consider the distance reduction rather than 3 full lots go down to 2 lots of 100 feet, of 50 feet each, which is, I believe, the smallest lots that we have here within the community. And then also as far as the continued closed environment, you don't have that in any kennel right now. Regardless if it's a veterinary situation for boarding or if it's DCHS or Forever Homes, etc. The windows are opened at different times of the year, and it doesn't lend to any more noise than anything else. And it's during operational hours. So I would hesitate to restrict that. It's a healthier environment for the animals regardless. And I would be considering about this as far as the solid waste removal, et cetera, just have it be a daily, make it very simple. Because what you're saying is every time a dog goes out there for some exercise, or every time 2 dogs come in and 2 dogs go, et cetera, it's just is a policing issue of sorts. So make it easy to fall within the confines or the parameters of what you're setting down, I guess is what I'm asking. So take a serious look at what you're asking here and perhaps consider amending to meet it and make it simple to follow it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Hi there. My name's Deb Newell. I reside at 1045 North William Avenue here in Fremont, Nebraska. I did not have time to read the whole packet that comes with the agenda. But when we're talking about kennels, small animal boarding facilities, that type of deal, I don't know if this is the right place for it, but I would hope the people that are operating these do actually hold a license either with the city or the state. So they are, restricted to the guidelines that we have to abide by the state. As far as waste removal, I can kind of respect, picking up after per pet in the case, with how we operate. We do have to pick up any waste in between each animal because it is one outdoor facility or we're on walks anyway, so we should be picking up after the pet immediately. As far as a policing situation, such as Susan Jacobus stated, there is a little bit of a middle of the road that you could put in there something about at the end of each exercise shift. We have 3 shifts a day, but again, to keep down on the spread of communicable disease, you should be picking that up between animals. But I just wanted to offer that if that terminology is a little more friendly. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Councilman Yerger?
I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I'm going to use it anyway as a result of the comments that were made by members of the public at this time. One of the concerns that I had at the onset of our meeting tonight was the fact that UDC rewrite is a complex matter. And the materials that are contained in our packet material tonight are extensive. And the amount of time allotted for review, debate, and discussion for myself and for others that are even newer than myself makes this task difficult, I think. And that's why I was suggesting that more time spent on this in the early going will benefit the project overall. And that's why I was suggesting that we could have more debate than we can get within our 5-minute time constraints and the fact we can't debate or discuss amongst each other as effectively because of our operating rules in council meetings. And so because of the things that are being brought up tonight, I'm hoping that those kind of things can come out. And this is only first reading, but as we look at these with some scrutiny, I'm interested what level of scrutiny did the Planning Commission give? Did they have any comment? Did they have any constructive recommendations that weren't in our packet material relative to their discussion of these issues? And if not, I kind of wonder, well, why not? Because we're having some discussion on these, and I would have hoped they would have had some too, and would be good to know what those comments were.
Any other comments from council? Seeing none, I take a motion to introduce and hold first reading. Councilman Legban,
Make a motion to hold first reading of ordinance 5560.
Councilman Coons,
In that motion.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Now introduce and hold first reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending Exhibit B of Ordinance 5427, specifically portions of the UDC Chapter 11, zoning subdivision and site development Exhibit B, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on first reading.
Thank you. Moving on to item 10. Ordinance 5561, amending Exhibit B of Ordinance 5427, specifically Section 11-616B regarding encroachments into the required yard, specifically to allow egress windows to encroach into the required yard by 3 feet and to allow ADA ramps to encroach into required yards provided 3 feet remains. This would be to introduce and hold first reading. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I'll pass this over to Jackie.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Mayor. Okay, so just as the ordinance suggests, we are proposing that egress window wells be added here to 3. So along with fire escapes, fireproof outside stairways and balconies, allowing those to project into side and rear yards as long as 3 feet remains adjacent to the lot line, and then into front yards of 20 feet remains from the lot line. Then moving down to the temporary ADA ramps, these are proposed to be allowed in the required front yard, providing that the ramp is set back at least 3 feet from the side property lines. So that's to accommodate those temporary wheelchair ramps to allow for access into to homes where the egress window wells is to allow for perhaps conversions or finishing of basements to include bedrooms where egress and ingress is required.
Any questions for staff or Jackie? Councilman Yerger?
I don't seem to think that there's as much issue perhaps with the egress windows issues as there might be with ramps and fire escapes. Some of the things that come across my mind for thoughts is, so this seems to be targeted more perhaps to residential, but I'm wondering, well, what's the effect, if any, of this change in for any downtown or commercial areas, and in particular, if you were doing fire escape access and it's in the alleyways, which are already narrow, et cetera. Is this excluding that? We don't need to be concerned, or this
Right,
is
this-
just purely residential?
This doesn't really apply so much to downtown because most of downtown is built with a 0 lot line. The fronts of the buildings and the sides of the buildings and the backs of the buildings predominantly are built up to the lot line. So to have a fire escape, you're allowed to project into the yard. There aren't those yard requirements in the DC district.
Okay, so the answer to my question is this really is focused on residential. It's not going to have an overlap to downtown.
It would not overlap to downtown.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Councilman Yerger?
One last question I should have asked about the ramps. So if you were on the property that had a side exit, for example, abutting the other adjoining property, is the setback requirement going to facilitate the building of ADA ramps out of the side of the building with the type of setback we're proposing without any issues?
This is focused on coming out of the front of the building, the front door, because generally the side yards are pretty narrow.
Is it limited to front door? Maybe I missed that.
Yeah. So it's allowed to extend into the front yard, provided that a side yard setback, 3 feet side yard setback is maintained. So typically what you'll see throughout town is that people will put those ADA ramps in the front of the house to get to the front door, because that's where you have the space to be able to make that slope. And oftentimes you have to do, a couple turns to be able to get up to the door and maintain the necessary slope. And trying to go in on the side, the slope would be too high to meet ADA guidelines.
Any other comments from council? Seeing none, I would take a motion to introduce and hold first reading. Councilman Legban?
I will make a motion to hold first reading of ordinance 5561.
Councilwoman Ganem?
Second motion.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Well, now introduce and hold first reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending Exhibit B of Ordinance 5427, specifically portions of the UDC Chapter 11 zoning subdivision and site development, Exhibit B, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on first reading.
Thank you. Item 11, ordinance 5562, amending Exhibit B of Ordinance 5427, specifically section 11-920 of the Unified Development Code regarding the definitions of campground, camping unit, car wash, duplex, dwelling unit, kennel, lodging house, lot, multifamily, personal campsite, row home, service station, storage yard, townhome, and transient lodging services. This would be to introduce and hold first reading.
I'll let
Go ahead,
Jackie talk
Jackie.
about the definitions and then I'll follow up with the discussion at the planning commission.
Thank you, Jennifer. So yes, we have our some new proposed definitions, some revised definitions, as well as the eliminated non-transient lodging services definition. I apologize, my screen seems to not want to move forward. All right. So starting with campground, says the proposed change here is to differentiate between campground and personal campsite, which we'll review the definition of here in a couple slides. The next one we have is camping unit. So this is a term that's used in the use-specific provisions for personal campsite. So here it's clarifying exactly what that means. So a single temporary shelter, 400 square feet or less in area, used for camping at a personal campsite. So these could include a tent, a travel trailer, recreational vehicle, etc. Moving into car wash, this is a new definition proposed to address the new use that's proposed to be distinguished from the service station use where it currently resides. So the car wash would be a use of a site for automated or manual washing and cleaning of passenger vehicles, recreational vehicles, or other light duty equipment. Next, moving into duplex, this is a use that's regulated. There are standards within the current UDC, but it's not defined. So it makes it difficult to interpret those regulations and determine whether a proposed development is a duplex or a townhome or other types of single family attached housing. So the definition here would be for a building containing 2 dwelling units, each with its own dedicated entrance, joined to one another at one or more sides by a fire resistant party wall or floor, and then located on one lot or 2 lots with the common lot line falling along a fire resistant party wall. Next, we have the definition of dwelling unit. So this is just to clarify what is meant by dwelling unit. Currently, the definition references the building code. And since we were hoping to have all the definitions clearly established within the UDC and not require people to go and reference other documents, we've just pulled that same definition from the building code here into the UDC. So we have kennel, since this is a new use proposed to be included in the small animal boarding facility category, we're proposing that this be defined separately. Next, we have lodging house. So this is being distinguished or clarified as to what the lodging house use means. Next, we have lot. So this is just to clean up some of the existing language. Multifamily, again, was a use that's included in their standards, but there's no existing definition. So establishing that and distinguishing it from the other types of residential uses that are included here in the definitions. Next, we have our personal campsite definition. So this is to support that new use that's proposed to be included. So it's an area used by private property owners and their guests for transient occupancy or lodging in a camping unit. Then our next set, starting off with row home. So this is another residential housing type that's included with specific standards, but is not distinguished from duplex, townhome, other types of single family attached housing. So this clarifies that a row home would be a building containing more than 5 dwelling units, each with its own dedicated exterior entrance, joined to one another at one or more sides by a party wall or walls. So next we have service stations. So this is updated to clarify that car washes aren't included in the definition for service stations. Storage yard is being updated just to clarify what this use is meant to be for. Next, we have townhome. So again, to add a definition for this use that has specific standards for it. So townhome, as defined here, would be a building containing no fewer than 3 and no more than 5 dwelling units. So you can see the sort of progression from duplex, which is 2, to townhome, which is 3 to 5, and then to row home, which is 5 or more. And then next we have our transient lodging services. So clarifying this definition, making it a much more typical definition for a hotel or a motel. And then clarifying that that does not include transient lodging or short-term rental services such as Airbnb, VRBO, or home and away. And those are the definitions in 11.920. Jennifer, I'm not able to hear you. I'm not sure if the microphone is picking you up.
Townhouses, and that definition is what is being carried forward here, which is 3 attached units. There are builders and realtors who think of a townhouse as 2 units, as opposed to a duplex, which is 2 units, but don't have a lot line going down the middle of that. The zoning code has been, since we updated the UDC, pretty clear that a townhouse is 3 or more units. The reason why it is frustrating, I think, for some of the builders and developers is that the building coverage requirements and impervious surface requirements for a townhouse are less than those for a duplex. But if you look at a duplex and 2 units that are attached with the lot line going down the middle, it's the same land use. So it's been treated that way. The building code requires, whether it's on 2 units on 1 lot or 2 units on 2 lots that are attached to each other, that there be a common firewall. So that's already a requirement in the building code. Right now, we're really just looking at the definitions. As we move forward with the UDC, we need to take a deep dive and really look at the lot size requirements and the pervious surface requirements and the building coverage requirements. And at that point, we might say the size, the building coverage requirements for duplex or 2-family attached units should be reduced. But right now, we're just trying to clarify and streamline the definitions. And that's something that we will be looking at as we move forward with this process.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Councilman Yerger?
Well, this is the area where I think things get kind of complicated from our prior history with UDC. And it was the one that gave me probably the most heartburn with understanding what we're doing and how we're approaching it today. So my question really for you and the consultants is, as we looked at changing these definitions, and some of them were new, so they won't appear as having any previous conflict, but they might. But where we're changing definitions, is the dive that went into this preliminary change for the definitions tied specifically to looking at the items that are affected in the rest of the UDC language? And the reason that I'm asking that is, when we made a change to the definition of open space, we changed a couple of tables. There were 42 other citations in the UDC that never got addressed that may have been impacted by our change in definition and how we approach that. And so my question here, as we change these definitions and we approach the rewrite of other major sections of explanatory code, are we automatically looking at where those changes go in the other sections of the UDC as we rewrite the definitions? Because in my opinion, we don't want to write definitions now that are going to be in gross conflict with other sections, and we can't fix it when we get over there because, and so we don't want to create definitions we can't utilize effectively in the other sections. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
Absolutely.
But I know that we've had that interplay, and we had it on parking, and we had it on open space, and just about everything. If you try to write code in the glossary, that's a bad place to write code. Code should be in the other sections. These should be definitional, but they direct what we do. And so maybe the consultant can explain how they take that on to help calm my concern.
Well, and I'll let Jackie answer after I do. A number of these definitions were referring to a different code. So we wanted to make sure that those definitions were brought directly into the UDC. And that's what we did with the definition of townhouse and I think dwelling unit. In other places, the UDC tables talk about the building standards for a row home or the building standards for a townhouse. But there's no definition for those. And so that's why we're putting them in here, is to help provide some of that clarity.
Okay.
And I'll
And
let-
one that's kind of tripped my trigger is when we looked at the definition here and we're explaining storage yard, and I'm looking at scrap and junk, and I'm going like, well, we'll certainly want to be interested in what zones that we would allow that definition of storage to apply, and the restrictions won't come in the glossary. The restrictions will come in other sections of code
Right.
where you would say, you can't put that in
And
residential.
I can tell you one of the reasons that that has come about is that there are areas that would be defined as, well, that actually didn't meet a definition and would now be defined as storage yards, so could be regulated, that weren't regulated before, where there are large piles of crushed concrete, dirt, asphalt, gravel, and the like.
Yep.
So now when those uses come forward in the future, we have a way to regulate them.
Yeah, we have that down on First Street, and that was one of the concerns. And the other concern that I have is that as we look at still allowing the abutment of light industrial up against residential in just about every zone, if junk and scrap, for example, is allowed to be accumulated in light industrial, you have it right up against residential property, and that shouldn't happen. So we'll have to attend to those things as they
Absolutely.
come down
That's
the road. But
we'll have a big conversation about that, I'm sure.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing on ordinance 5562. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Seeing none, I would take a motion to introduce and hold first reading. Councilman Coons,
Make a motion to introduce and hold first reading of ordinance 5562.
Councilman Legban,
I will second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
We'll now have first reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending Exhibit B of ordinance 5427, specifically portions of the UDC Chapter 11, zoning, subdivision, and site development, Exhibit B, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on first reading.
Thank you. Just want to say thank you to House Sale Levine and Jackie Wells for being here today, and for Jennifer as well. I know this is just first reading. We'll have more discussion on these items, but really appreciate the attention to detail and the planning that's going on in our UDC. And think it'll be some good needed changes. So appreciate your help. So thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 12, resolution 2021-025, approving conditional use permit for a small animal boarding facility kennel by Forever Home Inc. on property generally located at 925 West 6th Street, with an outdoor exercise area extending to the south onto a portion of tax lot 17. This time we'll have staff report.
I promise after this, I'll let somebody else have a chance. Good evening, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is a request for a conditional use permit for Forever Home for a small animal boarding facility / kennel. They would use this to train, rehome, and house animals that were surrendered, stray, rescued, or picked up by the city animal control officers. The area is zoned light industrial. There are suburban commercial uses with residences to the north. There is AR auto urban residential zoning and uses. Another building over to the east are about 130 feet. The changes to the language that we just had first reading on would be required. That language has the kennel within 150 feet. So the council would need to agree that in that particular area, it makes sense to be closer to a wet residential use. Again, that's a very industrial area with a main line rail line going through. So there's a lot of noise there. Staff feels that it's appropriate given the other noise level in the particular area. I will let the applicant address how they're going to operate the kennel and the use, but they do primarily walk the animals. The outdoor exercise area would be used much more minimally. They do intend to design the building and structure with insulation for the kennels because it's beneficial to the animals as well. So again, the UDC would need to be approved and the council would need to agree that 130 feet is appropriate for distance to a residential use in this particular area, which can be done under the proposed language, and staff does recommend that conditional approval.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing. Any comments from the public?
My name's Deb Newell. I'm here on behalf of Forever Home Inc. tonight, located at 236 West 6th Street. You know, I will tell you, we are required with this conditional use permit to have an outdoor dog area. I know how some of the neighbors might be worried about a noise level. However, we don't use our dog area very often. And when we are out there, we are with the animals. Most of the time, when you think of barking dogs, it's because they are outside unattended in someone's backyard, not being paid attention to, that kind of deal. We use our back run area kind of as an off leash training opportunity. So we are out there with them. We have 3 set schedules that we walk our dogs 1 mile a piece on, and then they have 2 set 20-minute training sessions a day, each dog. As far as any other noise that you would worry about, with what we're going to be doing to the inside of this facility, we are looking at special kennels, and those already have a noise dampening construction to them. And we've looked at actually some hard installed construction materials themselves. So we're still waiting back on some cost estimates on what the 2 will determine, but they are both double insulated. So even with the opening and closing of doors, you will not hear a lot of barking. As I stated at the Planning Commission last week, we have been at the facility we are at now, and other than one suggestion that someone reminded me of last week, we have not, to my knowledge, received any noise complaints or complaints otherwise. We, walk the neighborhood. We pick up our own animals' waste as well as anything else we might find on the way. So our only intent is to keep the neighborhood clean and just be able to interact with the neighborhood and the neighbors around us. We would hope that if you would grant us this and allow us to be moved in there, the neighbors, if they had issues or concerns, it could be something that we could talk amongst them and work out after the fact. The only other thing I was going to say is you guys have been doing a really good job of making all of those things green. So if you could just do it one more time, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Rachel Tuff, 323 West 5th Street. I just want to say that right now, like my home is so close to Forever Homes, their current location, that like my security cameras can see all the dogs walking by. But I had a elderly lady that was 89 years old that used to sit out on my porch because she lived with me, sit out on my porch for all day long just to watch them dogs walk by. And now I think my dogs go outside around the times that they let people, while they're walking their dogs, just so that he can bark. And, I think he communicates with their dogs. I don't know, but it's nice to have them in the neighborhood. So just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Teresa McGrander, 1825 North Keene. The house that Mrs. Tuff is referring to is my house. I took care of my uncle for 2 years, and we did build the ramp and the elevator and stuff there, and Forever Homes was there. My uncle was a quadplegic. He enjoyed them walking the dogs and seeing them. And some of their volunteers would actually let the dogs come up on the porch and he could pet them. It made his life very simple and gave him more of a quality life instead of a quantity. So I thank Forever Homes for that.
Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments from council? Councilman Yerger?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to amend resolution. I'd like to modify the fourth whereas statement to state the following. The city council has determined that for this application, it is acceptable to reduce the setback required from residential property to 125 feet. And I'd like to also modify the therefore be it resolved paragraph to strike items 1 and 2.
Before I entertain that, is there any other comments from council? Councilman Jensen?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell council and public that I looked at this facility where it's going to be going at. There are maybe 2 houses there. Everything else is industrial or businesses. It's not going to be I really don't expect them to have an issue over there with the public at all. I think they'll be fine in that area.
Councilman Legband?
Legal and staff is okay with the changes proposed by Mr. Yerger.
Quite honestly, I'm okay with it as long as Jennifer is. Okay, yeah, we're good.
I think so. I don't know why not.
Okay, any other comments from council? So Brad, do you want to just repeat your motion again so we're all clear?
Yes. My motion is to amend the resolution by first in the fourth whereas statement. For that whereas statement to state, the city council has determined that for this application, it is acceptable to reduce the setback required from residential property to 125 feet. And then the first 2 items of the now therefore it be resolved paragraph would be stricken. And let me explain why. If we don't do that, we are going to be limiting the implementation of Forever Homes operation because it's waiting for other zoning readings. And it seems to me this council can lower the setback from the current standard. We don't have to impose a new standard and then lower the standard from that. We should just do it now and approve the conditional use permit with the resolution amendments that I proposed.
Actually, I'm not okay with striking the first 2 from the now therefore be it resolved because the current language doesn't allow you to reduce it. So we have to move forward with the text change to allow you to reduce the distance between the use and a residential area.
So you're saying we've never made any exceptions to setback rules?
I'm saying that it's not allowed the way it's written in the language for that, in the conditions for that particular use right now.
Well, my question to you is, we have never modified the setback rules for any other application for
Where we
conditional use permit.
specifically allowed to reduce those setback requirements, we do. But if it's not specifically allowed, we can't.
That's legal for a definition of that. Is that accurate? We can't make an adjustment by council resolution to adjust setback requirements for unique circumstance?
If it's not specifically allowed under the EDC, no, you can't.
Seems like we have done it in the past.
They might have been on different types of issues, but to this specific issue, then the council is unable to. Thank you, Jennifer, for finding that.
Could you point me to that specific area of city code where you're making that ruling?
To where the council is not authorized.
Yeah, wherever it says we're not authorized to make an adjustment.
It's, if you have to be specifically authorized to be allowed to modify the zoning regulations. Otherwise, it's through a variance, which goes to the Board of Adjustment. So I'm looking for the,
Does legal have a citation for city code that you're relying on?
so if you look at the current use-specific regulations for the small animal boarding facilities, it says they may be allowed provided that we have the new use-specific regulations, and I'm not finding the area that we struck out. Hold on.
One possible solution could be,
Because, yeah, if you look at the existing 11-50403, it says no boarding facility or dog runs will be located within 300 feet of the property of any residential district or public park. It doesn't say the council may waive that. They are required to be screened by a type C buffer yard. It has to be within a fully enclosed building, designed by noise resistance, materials that are approved. Outdoor dog runs shall be located in the rear yards. The use is primarily located, those are in other districts. So there's nothing that allows the council under the current use-specific regulations to reduce any of those requirements.
Perhaps I should have introduced an adjustment to the glossary like we did on the parking item to resolve Mr. Borisol's problem, because we didn't have permission to reduce the side yard setbacks there, but we changed the glossary and did it. Okay, we'll have a motion on the table, so.
Legal, you had a comment? Or
well, with Jennifer's analysis there, I'd agree with that, and I wouldn't recommend modifying this resolution, eliminating those first two items. However, if we wish to accelerate the process, I would just say at the next meeting, specifically regarding those definitions, we could suspend the rules and just hold the third reading at the next meeting. The use specific criteria. Yeah. So
Okay.
we can accomplish, I think, what Mr. Yerger wants to accomplish at the next meeting and pass the resolution as it's written today.
Okay. So in regards to the last whereas statement, can we vote on that today? Or is it, are you
Sure,
just
yeah.
talking,
You can vote on that.
you're just
today.
talking about the item 1 and 2?
Yep, those are
correct?
the only two ones we have an issue with. Yep. You can vote on the whereas statement if you'd like.
Councilman Yerger, are you opposed to voting on just the whereas statement this time with your motion? Okay. Okay, so is there a second to amend the resolution 2021-025, the last whereas statement as Councilman Yerger suggested? Councilman Gibson?
I will second that.
Okay. Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0 with one abstention, Mayor.
Now I would take a motion in regards to the amended resolution 2021-025. Councilman Legman,
Make a motion to approve the amended resolution 2021-025.
Councilman Sukram,
I'll second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0 with one abstention, Mayor.
Time is now 9 o'clock. We'll take a 10-minute break. This time I will have legal do our report.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This follows the council's discussion regarding animal control issues, and I would just like to reiterate that any council discussion regarding this item, if there is any, be reserved to executive session due to the threatened litigation in this matter.
Thank you. Before we move on, this time we'll get into public comment. So any public comment on this item? One second, Tom. We're going to get you on here.
There you go.
I'm Tom Thompson. I'm the counsel for the Humane Society. And may I approach the city administrator? I have a letter that I would like to make part of the record.
Okay. We'll pass it out. So I'll take a motion to receive. Councilman Legband,
I make a motion to receive.
Councilman Sukram,
Second that.
cast your votes to receive.
Motion carries 7-1, Mayor.
Go ahead.
I will be very brief. This letter was delivered to the city administrator on Friday with the original to the mayor and copies in separate envelopes for each of the council. So if you haven't seen it before tonight, this is the same letter. And I'm simply pointing out what I understand to be on the agenda tonight. And that is the approval that there'll be a letter come out from the mayor to the Humane Society that says that the October 22, 2020 letter from Molly Miller to me is a notice of termination. You need to look at that letter very carefully. There is not one word mentioned in there about a notice of termination. And the contract that the Humane Society has with the city is very specific as to how you go about terminating the contract. Secondly, is that this letter that we're talking about dated October 22, 2020, the immediately preceding council meeting, this council had in front of it a motion to terminate the Humane Society contract. It was tabled indefinitely. And a few days later, this letter comes out. Who authorized the letter? It's not in the minutes, never authorized by this council. And certainly there's no notice of termination. So we're talking about a contract here. And the contract is very specific, but the Humane Society has never had notice of termination, as is required by amendment number 1. That's what's in the letter. And so I needed to point this out to you because this is a legal matter. I've never threatened litigation. But I would hope the council would follow the terms of its contract. And it's very specific. Thank you.
Any other public comment on this item?
Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street, Fremont, Nebraska. I do believe that Attorney Thompson may be in error. And part of that, unless you're hiding underneath a rock, you don't turn on the radio, you don't look at the paper, and you don't have an idea of what's going on at city council level, beginning in April, and actually a few years prior with some of the issues with DCHS, the advisory board was created for a reason. To consider, to find or not find any issues of contract error, contractual issues, and that was found. At the October 22nd meeting, 2020, of which I was part of the council, we did discuss termination. We did discuss sending a letter of notice, which was done, in which we were all copied to that letter. And that letter was sent certified mail to care of Tommy Thompson, who represents DCHS. You've been dealing with this now as an entity since some of you took seat, some of you prior. October 22nd was 122 days ago, as of today. That's more than 60 days notice. They've been on notice ever since. Various board members, their executive president of their board has come here to speak. Their director of DCH has come to speak, and other citizens for and against have spoken. Cut the ties, terminate this effective immediately. I don't know why we need to have another 30 days compounded on top of 122 days. This notice was given October 22nd. 60-day notice, the termination should have come 62 days ago, and it didn't. Why drag this on at any point? And I will end with this. Please consider reading the letter entered into record, because the public doesn't have any knowledge of it, and we won't have access. Typically, it's not entered into your minutes online. And since it wasn't entered prior, which doesn't allow the public any time to review or read the content. However, again, 122 days is more than enough time to terminate the contract. Please consider termination effectively immediately tonight. Do not extend it another 30 days. Thank you.
Wendy Pete, 13563 Margot Street, Omaha, Nebraska. I have no idea where Mr. Thompson has been for the last 16 months. I've never seen him here at a city council meeting. I have been here for the last 16 months speaking. Now, all of a sudden, as a last ditch effort, he shows up here trying to get you all to be afraid of DCHS legal. Where was Mr. Thompson as DCHS's attorney when Spencer Wilson, Jamie Parsons, and Tamar Reed met with Judge Hall on Thursday, July 2nd, to request the warrant being quashed for the hard drive, hiding security footage of DCHS when Cinnamon was taken there and held for 14 days. So who really is the attorney and who's running things? Why did you even know about that? What your people are doing? I support pulling this contract. I also support the fact if DCHS wants to sue you. I've been telling you all for 16 months, DCHS cannot withstand the stuff that has come out that he knows about, that you all know about. They cannot withstand that. You guys would have already paid less in attorney fees than you've paid to continue their contract if you just let them sue. We have not been wrong about anything. Everything we've presented to you all these last 16 months has come to fruition and has been proven as true. So please vote to cancel the contract immediately and let them do whatever they want to do. There's pages and pages and pages of names they don't want brought up. There's pages and pages of witnesses that they don't want brought up. So thank you for your time.
Ray Tuff, 323 West Fifth Street. I just wanted to second what Ms. Jacobus was saying. We have been here for so long, telling you guys exactly what's going on. You had an advisory board. And while I do really appreciate the letter that Mayor wrote to go cancel this contract, it isn't perfect, but it, you know, it really could be given. And obviously, if he wants to show up here after 15 months or 16 months, then and act like this is the first time they've been on notice, when it clearly states that our chief of police put them on notice back in December of 2019. Had anything been done about that, Bessie, the reason why everything happened, wouldn't be dead today. So, and last week when that whole thing went on where we couldn't speak and everything, you know, that was 2 more weeks that you guys pushed this can down the road. She's out there abusing animals. That how you guys can lay your heads down at night knowing that she's abusing animals, and there's animals that have been there for almost a year. Our chief of police is even having to stay here tonight because of all of this in case you guys go into executive session. This is even wasting our, you know, our officers' time, everything. And so I just would ask you to, you know, vote to terminate this contract immediately because they've been on notice long enough. And obviously he's still going to come here and try to threaten litigation and everything. Well, let him do it, because we have already wasted $108,000 for a whole year of paying them for work that they haven't been doing. So please consider that, just doing it immediately. Thank you.
Teresa and Grander, 1825 North Keene Avenue, Fremont, Nebraska. I have never been to a city council meeting. I lived in this town my whole life. Never once did I consider coming to a city council meeting until the ordeal with the DCHS. And now I'm sitting here for 16 months, every city council meeting, saying the same thing. He even said himself, they got notice in October. That's long enough. 120 days over. We're wasting the money. Give it to the homeless. Buy somebody a meal. Hell, pay for Brian Newton's lunch. You know, quit wasting the money on DCHS. You need to pull that contract with no more days and immediately and pay them for just this month. We're tired. And we're tired of coming here and taking up all your time and our time, even though I've got to know quite a few of you very personally, and I enjoy it, but I don't want to be here every day, every meeting. But it's your job to protect our animals, and Forever Homes has been doing it free for over a year now. The citizens of Fremont have been doing it. DCHS has not done anything. They left town when the flood came, and that's when we needed them the most. As far as him knowing that there is no discrepancies in our contract, there are numerous violations. Your advisory board found numerous ones, and yet you didn't listen and you didn't do anything about it. So we're asking you now, please terminate that contract immediately as of tonight. And then you don't have to see me no more. Thank you.
June Westfall, 1401 North Park. I've been coming. I haven't been to as many meetings as a lot of these girls, but I've been here for several times. And what you people do is you just ignore us and you go right over the top of our heads and won't let us speak at all. I have a dog, and if it was to go to DCHS, I would probably get the stormtroopers to get him out because he's that close to me. He's my family. When my husband died, I asked, we're big animal advocates, and I asked who I could give his money that I got in cards and stuff to. And everybody said, no, not DCHS, give it to Forever Homes. And so I did. And they asked my permission when I gave it to them if they could treat this dog with this money because it had a very expensive surgery coming up. They have been nothing but kind. DCHS, I tried to adopt an animal down there and that didn't go well at all. So please terminate their contract. They don't do their job. You're paying them $9,000 a month for nothing. Thank you.
Any other comments? Seeing none, I guess I would take a motion to send Dodge County Humane Society notice of termination. Councilman Yerger.
I hereby move to amend the last paragraph of the city's termination letter being sent to DCSH from terminate in 30 days to terminate immediately.
Okay, Councilman Gibson.
I'll second that.
Legal, can you chime in, please?
I would not recommend making that amendment.
Is there any other council discussion? There's a motion and a second. Councilman Sukram.
Yeah, from legal, why?
Based on the contract language, I would not recommend making that amendment.
Any other council discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. I would take a vote based off of Councilman Yerger's suggestion. Amendment. Thank you. Cast your votes.
Motion fails 4-4.
I'll vote no. Okay, back to the item. Motion to set Dodge County Humane Society notice of termination. Councilman Ligman.
I make a motion to send Dodge County Humane Society the notice of termination.
Councilwoman Ganem.
I second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 6-1 with one abstention.
Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. All items in the consent agenda are considered to be routine by the city council and will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member or citizen so requests, in which event the item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Is there any changes from staff or council or the public in regards to the consent agenda? Councilman Yerger.
I'd like to pull item 16 for discussion, please.
Any other items? Seeing none, I would take a motion to approve consent agenda items 13 through 15, 17 through 19. Councilman Gibson.
I would make that motion, items 13 through 15, 17 through 19.
Councilman Jensen.
That.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 16, a resolution 2021-026 authorizing an agreement with Humanities Nebraska for Key Memorial Library to provide the primetime family reading time program in 2021. This time we'll have staff report.
Mayor, City Council, Laura England Biggs, Interim Director, Keene Memorial Library. This is an ongoing program that we have offered 6 years running, with the exception of 2020 due to the pandemic. What we're proposing is to do a virtual prime time in 2021. And this agreement is needed in order to move forward.
Thank you. Any questions for Laura? Councilman Yerger?
Yes, I pulled this because I'd like to draw attention to the agreement at page 2, section 6. It's entitled Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities Responsibilities. So my first question is this a correct reference? We're contracting with the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities Group for Fremont Library functions. Is that that's my first question.
The primetime family reading time is a product of the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. It's licensed by Humanities Nebraska. And Louisiana takes responsibility for developing new curricula for us.
Okay, so the Louisiana Endowment Humanities will have the responsibility for establishing doing the review and approval of the books in Fremont, Nebraska's library.
Well,
Not the Nebraska
they do it.
Endowment for the Humanities.
They
but the
take care of
Louisiana.
it for the Humanities Nebraska collections. We get books from Humanities Nebraska.
I just want to be clear who has the responsibility here as I get on to my next question. So it could either be the Louisiana Endowment Group, the Nebraska Endowment Group, or as I'm going to get to, it could be the library. And so we're saying it is going to be the Louisiana Endowment Group, just as it's written in this agreement.
Humanities Nebraska submits a list of books. Louisiana approves that list. Fremont selects books off the list put forward by Humanities Nebraska.
I would ask legal whether or not this seems to be in congruence with section 3705F of Fremont's municipal code, where it looks like the library board has the function of establishing approval and review of the books that are contained in the library.
I will say this contract has been put forward 6 years running and it's not changed.
I'm only trying to establish who has the final authority with regards to the review and the books that are placed in the library, whether it's the library board, whether it's the Nebraska Humanities or whether it's the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities group. I just want to be clear on who has the ultimate responsibility for what's placed in our library.
The final decision rests with Fremont making the selection from that list.
Thank you. That's helpful. And you would agree with that that's congruent with 3705. Okay. And in that regard, I don't want to get into it necessarily, but I had some concern with regards to outside agency review, discussion and approval alignment as we get into item 26 tonight, because I'm not sure that they were totally congruent, just a matter of reference. Thank you for the clarity with regards to that. I don't see any specific reference in here for in this agreement with the library board having final authority or the Nebraska Endowment for the Humanities having some authority or input to all of this. And I'm wondering why not? Since this is our agreement, wouldn't we want to stake our ground as to we retain final authority?
The library board doesn't traditionally get involved in setting programming. They set policy and they allow the staff to take that lead.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Ganem?
If you've not attended a prime time, you should. It's an outstanding program and one that Nebraska Humanities wanted to be involved in, and certainly at the state level started it. And I was so excited to see that Fremont really actually participated with it 6 years ago. And it is a wonderful program, especially for our Hispanic families, because those books are read to them in their native tongue and then in English as well. And I have participated as a reader when they first started in a number of schools. And so it was very exciting to see how you draw in entire families to develop the love for reading, and how families and parents can help children learn, especially if they're at a disadvantage with language and not understanding English yet. But the kids are thrilled with it. People appreciate it a lot. And I was just appreciative that Fremont decided to participate, certainly with the state humanities, or Nebraska Humanities. And yes, part of the review, and it's Nebraska Humanities, definitely is just to make sure we have quality control. That's what national programs do sometimes. It's just for the quality that you have to just jump through some of the hoops and present some of the materials that are being presented. But there's usually a lesson with every book that's read, and the kids get books to take home.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, any comments from the public? Seeing none, any additional comments from council? Councilman Yerger?
I would just ask legal whether or not, in light of my earlier question as to who has ultimate responsibility, because it's implied in the paragraph that I was discussing with staff, that the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities recommends items for inclusion, but nowhere in the responsibility of the Fremont Library in section 7 does it indicate that the library board has the ultimate approval responsibility. And would it have been inappropriate for there to be a responsibility line item that indicates that they retain ultimate responsibility under 3705F?
You would like to include that in the agreement itself?
Yes, I believe it would be appropriate because I think that's city code. And during the dialogue that we've had, it sounded like the endowment is going to make recommendations.
Yes,
And ultimately, the library board is going to make the decisions.
yes.
But it's not listed in the responsibilities of the library.
And since it's codified in city code, I believe the parties to the contract know that the city abides by the city code. So I don't see a reason to put it in the contract unless that would make you more comfortable, but I don't see.
Well,
a
definitely
reason
would
to.
make me personally more comfortable because we're listing the responsibilities. And it seems to me that's an important responsibility that falls to the library board. to
That the
make-
library board is responsible for the intellectual content and development of the library? That section of the code, you want to
Yeah,
include that?
3705F. I don't care if we do it by reference or maybe you don't want to do it that way. That just says that the library board maintains the final authority with regards to review and approval of, books placed in the library.
I think the agreement states that, or that's what the agreement is all about. The library makes a final decision.
I'd like to recommend we add a sub-bullet point to item 7 that gives that authority under 3705 to the library board.
Any other comments from council? Seeing none, was that a motion? Was that a motion to amend and adding a bullet point of, what was that? Okay.
Laura, it won't be difficult to get a new signature on this if it is amended, would it, by Mr. Hamilton? Ms. Hamilton, I'm sorry.
Okay. Is there a second? Councilman Ellis?
I second it.
Any other comments from council before we vote? Seeing none, cast your votes on the amendment.
The motion fails 4-4.
Moving on now we're just back to where we started. Resolution 2021-026. Do I have a motion and approval? Councilman Coons,
Make a motion to approve resolution 2021-026.
Councilman Legban,
I'll second that.
cast your votes.
I think Councilmember Ganem and Gibson, I didn't record your votes. Councilmember Gibson,
There you go. You're in.
thank you. The motion carries 7-1, Mayor.
Moving on to unfinished business. Item 20, ordinance 5550 to annex property generally located at the southwest corner of West 23rd Street and Business Park Drive at the request of Andrew Stamp on behalf of Fabrication Holdings LLC, doing business as Elemental Fabrication. This would be for final reading. This time we'll have staff report.
Mayor, City Council, Brian Newton. Jennifer went home and asked me to cover this. This is the final reading to annex in the property of the old John Deere building that Elemental bought. Are there any questions?
Questions for staff? Seeing none, any comments from the public? Any comments from council? I would take a motion to hold final reading of ordinance 5550. Councilman Jensen,
I will make the motion to hold final reading of ordinance 5550.
Councilman Legban,
I'll second that.
cast your votes.
Councilmember Yerger, I didn't record your vote. Thank you. The motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
We'll now have final reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, annexing by voluntary petition property generally described as the east one half of lot 18 Miramar Lakeside Business Center, the west one half of lot 18 Miramar Lakeside Business Center and tax lot 45 located in section 16, township 17 north, range 8 east of the 6 p.m. Dodge County, Nebraska, and extending the corporate limits to include said real estate, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date on final reading.
Thank you, Tyler. Now cast your final vote on ordinance 5550.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Item 21, ordinance 5552, approving sale of the Tech Park property to Rock Hill Real Estate LLC to relocate Pearl Academy Daycare Business. This would be for second reading. This time we'll have staff report.
Mayor, City Council, Brian Newton, City Administrator. As the mayor said, this is a second reading proposing to sell a lot in the tech park to Pearl Academy. They'd like to relocate their business in the tech park. We are really close to getting the legal and getting the plat. You should have it probably this week or next. And so the final reading, we will have the final survey of the lot and the plat that goes along with it. So until then, we can't expedite this. We're still waiting for that legal and the plat. So I'd entertain any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Councilman Yerger.
I'm going to ask one that I asked last time under a different item. Pearl Academy will be located on 29th Street, correct? And as a part of the infrastructure that was included in the original analysis in setting the price, LB 840 funds would have included a variety of infrastructure items, including the street. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think
And
there's
in that,
two prior resolutions the city council has passed setting up the LB 840 to purchase the property, actually three, purchase the property, and then two others to fund the improvements. Yes.
right, so a couple of those resolutions went through and LB 840 money was set aside. And in my review of those 2008 and 2010 resolutions, the paving project related to 29th Street was estimated at $700,000. And that's what's built into the sales price theoretically.
Yeah.
The latest traffic plan put out by the city engineer indicates that that project's going to cost the city at least $800,000 in today's environment, given inflation and the COVID effects, et cetera.
I
So
think
my question to you
Mhm.
is, there's $100,000 difference between what we built into the sales price and what it's actually going to cost the city, at least based on current estimates. I'd like to know how Pearl Academy will participate in paying for that $100,000 worth of inflation or additional infrastructure cost, if at all.
If you look back, the 700,000, I think it was 29th Street. If you look in Dave Godigan's estimate, he's got 800,000 for 29th and for Lincoln, 800,000. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure the prior estimate, if that was just 700,000. I think just for 29th, if that's the case, there is no run up. In fact, it's substantially less.
You think the estimate to pave 29th Street is less than it was 10 years ago?
Appears to be, because he's got 800,000 estimated for two streets, and I think the 700,000 was just 29th.
Then let
Maybe
me
it
post,
wasn't
let me
clear.
post that in the form of a hypothetical then, rather than based on his current estimates. If in fact the infrastructure costs that were built into the price of the original sales that we've been using is exceeded in any way for streets, sewer, sanitary sewer, gas, electric, any of the things that we consider city infrastructure, if any of those costs have cost the city more over the last 10 years and weren't built into the sales price, who is going to incur the cost associated with those increases?
So you really have two choices. You could adjust the price. There's no reason we can't adjust the price on future sales. Because once we get better estimates on what the cost of the infrastructure is going to be, we could always adjust the price. The other option, which we've done on other parks that the city has done, is that's the reason for LB 840. LB 840 was set up for economic development, and that's exactly what we're doing, is pushing economic development in that park. So there's absolutely no reason that it has to break even. It may not break even. And if you look in some of the prior parks, I'm sure we didn't break even, but that's what the LB 840 was set for. And that's why the council approved it, saying we want to use LB 840 to stimulate economic development, and we want to make these sales. There's no rule that says it has to break even.
I appreciate your opinion. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Any comments from the public?
Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street, Fremont, Nebraska. The discussion of Tech Park has been around for a long time. Roger Pannier purchased it after the original Fountain Springs didn't decide to build in 2008. He purchased it for just shy of $640,000, or roughly in that ballpark, 640 to 645. The city purchased it 3 years later for $1.6 million. That's a nice tidy little increase in funding. Obviously, we must have had a huge cost of living increase, and properties must have risen. If you were to buy an acre at Gallery 23, what would it cost you? Would it cost you $20,000? Would 1.2 acres cost you $23,000? Unimproved, what would your cost be? What would it cost you to develop it? Well, the challenge is you're going to spend over $200,000 for that lot and also have to allow for additional monies for paving streets and infrastructure improvements. Along the lines of the LB 840 funding that you had the discussion on. That is for economic development, but it isn't to be intended as a freebie either. Land has increased in value since the city bought this in 2011 for $1.6 million. Cumulatively, if you look at what it's being sold for, we're selling it at a loss. Granted, infrastructure and improvements are part of the game, but it isn't totally on the taxpayers' back. This is an overburdened. And this rebate should have been something that you spoke against. You're all seated here because you're here to represent your ward. Are you truly representing them by giving away the taxpayers' money? Are you being fiscally responsible? We need to sell that land. We need to sell that land. We were going to keep that $900 and some thousand of LB 840 fund to help fund other projects, whether it be the small business owner that wants to expand or a new business owner coming to town that wants to build or to purchase a building. That's what that money was intended for, but now we're giving it back. And we're also allowing, and farther down on the agenda, someone to tell us, if you don't do what I ask you to do, I'm not going to purchase it. Well, then so be it. Why are you allowing that to happen? Each property aligning on the streets, each property should be shared and shared alike on the costs. And if you want to reduce some of those costs by a half, perhaps maybe that'd be reasonable to what you've done in other areas. But why are you doing it now in this area? Because we are not that desperate. I support business. I've supported business growth. I don't take opposition to it, but I oppose to giving away all of it. It's interesting that you feel that $20,000 is a fair market price for over an acre of ground.
Any other comments from the public?
Seth McGinn, 925 West Sixth Street. My question is, how long has the city had this ground? How long has there been interest in it? Mr. Jacobitz brought up some great points about you have due diligence for the taxpayers. I second her completely. It's about time for this ground to bring some money to the city of Fremont. And if it is such a great deal or a steal as people are imposing, I question why she didn't buy a lot there and start a business in the city of Fremont if it's a monetary deal and giving the taxpayers money back to the city.
Any other comments from the public? Seeing none, any comments from council? Councilman Coons?
Make a motion to hold second reading of ordinance 5552.
Councilman Jensen?
I will second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
We'll now have second reading of ordinance 5552.
An ordinance pertaining to the sale and conveyance of real estate owned by the city of Fremont, Nebraska to Rock Hill Real Estate LLC pursuant to Nebraska law.
Thank you. Moving on to 22, ordinance 5553, approving sale of the Tech Park property to McGinn Holdings LLC to purchase additional land for future growth. This would be for second reading. At this time, we'll have staff report.
Mayor, City Council, Brian Newton, City Administrator. This is the second purchase of property from Mr. McGinn. After he bought the initial 4 lots, he realized surprisingly that our code doesn't allow him to build a 120,000 foot square building, which he wants to do over 4 phases on 4 acres or 4.5 acres. And so he came back and, he's purchasing 2 additional acres to be able to cover the footprint because of our code. And so he's graciously wants to buy 2 more lots which will give him really 6 lots in total to be able to build 120,000 square foot building over 4 different phases. And so I think we're really grateful for the fact that he wants to put such a large building in there. It really says a lot for what he wants to do in this park. So I'd answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Seeing none, any comments from the public?
I got Dave Mitchell on Zoom.
Dave Mitchell, go ahead. Dave Mitchell, go ahead. Dave Mitchell, are you there?
Oh, you know what? Just a minute. Now try Dave.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'd just like to echo Brian's remarks. I think this is a great example of an existing business that's not only committing to this project, but after he's entered into the due diligence phase, his engineer, Jerry Nelson, who indicated that the floor area ratio for the existing lots would only allow about a 68,000 square foot building. And so Seth is taking the additional step of acquiring additional property so that property is there, hopefully when he reaches that fourth phase. And I think it's important to remember that sometimes we're a little more enchanted when there's a new business that comes to town and we really want to roll out the red carpet. And I think it's important that we remember that our existing businesses that have been dedicated and sacrificed resources to stay in our community are ones that perhaps should be given more deference, or at least placed on a level playing field. And so I think it's also important to recognize that the Birds and Pearl Academy and the Weimers and McGinn's, they're all making commitments here that are more than just paying a certain amount per lot. They're committing to signing their personal net worths on the line to lenders so that they can construct buildings. They'll be borrowing money, no doubt, for lines of credit to allow them to operate once they've gotten going. And hopefully that will lead to jobs. It will lead to tax value to the area. And I'd also point out that even though we have a TIF contingency and LB 840 contingency in the contract, as a matter of prudence, Seth could confirm to you tonight that it's highly unlikely that we're going to be applying for any economic development benefits. He's going to build this facility on his own. And the fact that you're able to attract all these businesses here, even if it's at a break even, or even for the sake of argument, it would be less, is much more valuable to the city than having these lots continue to sit vacant. And I was involved in the GFDC at the time this property was acquired, and it occurs to me, and perhaps Brian could confirm, if we didn't meet the certain milestones within this year or next year at some point in time, we're obligated to pay $1 million back to the state of Nebraska. And so by selling these lots, maybe at a competitive price and saving the city $1 million payback, that to me is pretty fiscally responsible. And in the end, we get a bunch of new or existing businesses and some new local businesses that have an opportunity to grow and prosper in Fremont. These contracts should be celebrated, and we encourage you to do so. And we just thank you for the opportunity to continue Can Cooker and McGinn Holdings in Fremont. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Mitchell? Seeing none, any other comments from the public? Any comments from council? Councilman Yerger?
So I have a couple of observations. It looks like between the first reading and the second reading that paragraph 2 of the purchase agreement has been modified unless I don't have the old agreement here, but my recollection was that the escrow money was
Yes,
less than and was increased in this version for second reading. Is that accurate?
that's correct. You asked that that be brought
Right,
up. and
that's
so
what I
we-
thought.
They
And so I
voluntarily did
Just
that.
making note of the fact that
Yes.
that was accommodated and it's in at the 3% or
Yeah.
some portion higher than 3%. So my other comments really are these, and one is kind of a reaction to Mr. Mitchell's comments on item 21 that he indicates that the buyer likely is not going to ask for TIF or LB 840. Yet it's a contingency as a shall have approved by the council those items. And so if it's not likely, I guess I would wonder why we need to have that condition in this agreement. But the most significant one to me, and it's still in here, and I raised my concern last time, has to do with paragraph 20 and my discussion with the city administrator earlier on as to how does the city accommodate handling the cost increases for infrastructure once we have set the price. It looks like these contracts are fixed as to the price and only variable as to the amount of property being bought once the surveys are completed. That's the adjusting factor. It's not the infrastructure cost. And since the infrastructure costs that were used in establishing the estimates were 8 to 10 years old, I cannot believe that construction costs haven't increased over that time and that those estimates are woefully deficient. And what paragraph 20 does in my mind is basically ensure, which is in no other agreements that we've approved. It basically ensures that in this contract, there won't be any participation should the city figure out what kind of mechanisms they would use to handle the inflationary costs associated with the tech park. And so I still remain opposed to paragraph 20, and it's in here. Other than that, I applaud the buyer for wanting to foster and grow his business. I have no objections to that, but I still have a reservation about paragraph 20. And based on his legal counsel's statements, I'm not sure that I would even think that paragraph 21A needs to be in the agreement.
Any other comments from council? Seeing none, I would take a motion to hold second reading of ordinance 5553. Councilman Coons,
Make a motion to hold the second reading of ordinance 5553.
Councilman Legband,
And I will second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-1, Mayor.
Now have second reading.
An ordinance pertaining to the sale and conveyance of real estate owned by the city of Fremont, Nebraska to McGinn Holdings LLC pursuant to Nebraska law on second reading.
Thank you. Moving on to new business, item 23, resolution 2021-030 to approve a contract with Matrix Consulting Group to provide services to conduct a long-range master plan and strategic plan for the fire department. This time we'll have staff report.
Good evening, Todd Burnt, Fire Chief. In late November, we posted an RFP with a deadline of January 6th to have proposals back to the city. We received 6 of them. Matrix was determined to be the best one out of all of them so far. What we want them to do is do a long-range master plan and a strategic plan. What that's going to be is determining where we are now and determine what our future needs are and come up with a plan to bridge that gap. They'll bridge that gap with requesting data, not only from the fire department, but also through other departments within the city. They would come in and I do extensive interviews with elected officials, administration, other department heads. This will also be a chance for the community to provide input on what their expectation of the fire department and determine if we're doing a good job or not. And they'll take all this information and they'll come up with a detailed plan
And when their final report is finished, they would actually come in front of council and give you a report on their findings and recommendations. I'll take any questions that you have. Also, I believe Matrix Consulting do have some representatives that are zooming in on this, so they may answer if I am not able to.
Thank you, Chief Burnt. Any questions? Councilman Yerger?
Yes, Chief. Glad to see that we're going to do the analysis requisite to the needs of the fire department as a part of this. My question goes for this. So we're spending $60,000 to do this contract, and I'm interested in understanding how the updating of this specific item that they'll be looking at intertwines with the other contracts that we have with the folks that are doing the UDC, the comp plan, and the traffic plan, all of which are referenced here in your long-range master plan scope of work, that you need that comprehensive plan document, you need the land use documents, you need the zoning maps, et cetera, et cetera. So those hopefully are all being intertwined as to whatever they're coming up with in
And part of
their
their,
analysis.
like in their scope of work is actually to get together with the people who are the consultants now who are doing the comprehensive plan and try to exchange some information. If there's any information they can get from them to put into a report. So I'm hopefully that in the scope of work that they work together, basically.
Okay.
That they reach out to the comprehensive consultants and try to get some input and maybe even provide input to them.
And the only reason that I asked those questions is I didn't see, unless I missed it in the documentation and the scope of the work with regards to your RFP, the scheduled tie-ins that might be prerequisite for the Jose Levin work on the other, the comp plan, the zoning, and the traffic plan. They're going to be on some fixed timelines. Your material is interdependent and needs to be incorporated that, and yet is dependent on that information as well. And I was concerned that are the contractors cognizant of the scheduling requirements for how those intertwine?
That I don't know. I know that this plan is only going to take about 5 months to complete. And I know the comprehensive plan is what, a year and a half down the road yet.
So you'll be done first, most
Yes,
likely, and feeding information.
But hopefully they can get some information from the comprehensive consultants now that they can sort of incorporate into our plan, in the fire department plan, and vice versa.
Well, it would seem like their preliminary information would certainly be necessary for them, because if we're changing our comprehensive plan or, our land use, where we'll place residential or what businesses of major magnitude would certainly affect your fire department deployment of services. And so they are very much interdependent.
Oh, yes.
And so that we would want to make sure that the work that's going on in that other area is specifically being fed into your analysis rather than any old information would be used, because if we change it after this study is done, that would be problematic. So I just wanted to make sure the timeline synced up.
And I know our planning director, Jennifer, she's going to be a very important part, because some of the things they're going to be looking at is some of the developments around town, when's their completion dates, and really look at the growth of Fremont so they can come up with a detailed long-range master plan.
Okay. It would be good, I think, if we had some sort of drafted schedule between you and the other consultants that indicates this is all going to go back and forth and everything's going to be copacetic, but I didn't see it in the agreement. That's why I was concerned.
Okay.
Thanks.
R. Finn, this must be the consultant.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think one thing that's important for us to get on the record for this is a key to the way we do our studies is to first fully understand the community, understand the level of service expectations the community has. And then as we look at the growth, determine what type of growth is going to occur, what the community risks are moving forward, so that we can determine any changes in service levels according to that risk. And to the councilman's point,
we remain available to the city beyond the length of the contract. So if we've produced the master plan, and it's important we get this on public record, we are available to the city. If the fire chief comes back to us and says, there's been a material change in the traffic patterns, a material change in calming devices, a material change in risk because this became part of the long-range city comprehensive plan, we would go back and reanalyze that, determine the impact for the fire department, and at no additional cost, make any adjustments to that master plan because there was a change to the factual information that we were provided as part of the project.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff or the consultant on this? Seeing none, any comments from the public? Any comments from council? Councilman Yerger?
I appreciate the clarity that was just offered relative to how they would work in adjustments after the fact. And in fact, those would be at no additional cost. So that's very helpful. Appreciate that. And if there's no other council commentary on this resolution, I would move to approve resolution 2021-030.
Councilman Legman? Cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
Item 24, resolution 2021-031, approving renewal of retail liquor licenses for a period from May 1st, 2021 to May 1st, 2022. This time we'll have staff report.
Mayor and council, this is for a renewal of approximately 30 liquor licenses, 30 to 40 liquor licenses. There's Class Cs that happen in November, and then these are all of the non-Class C licenses, mostly restaurants, grocery stores, licenses like that. There was a notification process, and so in January a notice was sent out to the public indicating that if anybody has a protest or opposition to these licenses being renewed, they would contact us and we would be presenting that to you. There were no protests received, and so I would ask the city council move to approve the resolution 2020-031 as presented. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Seeing none, any comments from the public? Seeing none, any comments from council? We'll take a motion in regards to resolution 2021-031. Councilman Legman.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2021-031.
Councilwoman Ganem.
Second the motion.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0 with one abstention, Mayor.
Thank you. Moving on to item 26, motion 2021-032 to approve changes Keene Memorial Library Policy Manual as recommended by the library board. This time we'll have staff report.
Mayor, City Council, Laura England Biggs, Interim Director, Keene Memorial Library. The library policy manual has been a project on my desk for almost 5 years. During that time, we've had several different directors who've made changes to practice without updating the policy manual. This project seeks to bring all of that into alignment. The most recent change is to stay in compliance with the ordinance, which removes property owners from those who qualify for a free library card. We've also changed the number of renewals for many of our items to facilitate borrowers who need a little more time to read their materials and to stop fines from accruing. I would entertain any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Seeing none, any comments from the public? Seeing none, any comments from council? Councilman Yerger?
Yeah, I wasn't fast enough to get in before
Oh.
public comment, but it doesn't
Sorry.
matter. I'll make them now. So I have a couple of comments and questions, I guess, as I looked at this document. As I read through this, there are a myriad of references, in particular in titling this the Keene Memorial Library. They're scattered throughout the document. I didn't count them, but there are many, many of those. And when we went through the Fremont Municipal Code, not too many meetings ago, section 3-701, it was recommended by the prior board, library board, and it was brought up for council that we should amend 3701 to include a reference to Keene Memorial Library rather than just public library as it's written today. And that was rejected. So Fremont Municipal Code calls Fremont's library the public library, even though I know that it has a name. And believe me, I have no problem with that. I'm just looking for consistency. So because it's inconsistent, that is, the manual is inconsistent with Fremont Municipal Code, I think there's a couple of things that we ought to think about doing. And there is an easier one versus the other. One would be to strike all of the Keene Memorial references in this manual because they don't match up with city code. That's not necessarily my recommendation, but it's an option. Since 701 references the library specifically, and we could have at that time inserted a phrase or at least a parenthetical that said public library, also referred to or references Keene Memorial Library herein, would have sufficed if we'd have done that in 701. And I think that's probably the appropriate thing for us to do. Leave the manual and the references to Keene Memorial Library, which I think are important for the community and for the recognition of what and the people understand what that means. I'm really not sure why we didn't do that in city code in the first place, to make sure that we called it the Keene Memorial Library at least once in city code. So I would hope that we would opt for option 2 here, to go with this manual and the references to Keene Memorial Library, but go back to 3701 and insert a parenthetical where it says public library to Keene Memorial Library, so that we're all in sync and we give due credit to the, those that set up the library. That's my first recommendation. I would question whether or not section 4-2.5 of the manual, which says the library director should be open and closed for special occasions, etc. And I believe that Fremont Municipal Code 3705G puts such guidance in the operation in the hands of the library director. And I think that's where it should remain, yet the manual says it has to have the approval of the city administrator. I've looked at this at the handbook, as many of the other items in here are referred to city administrator for approval, and the handbook governs those, and it specifically says that those areas of social media and those kinds of things must be approved by the city administrator, and so those were appropriate. But on this particular paragraph, 4.2.5, I didn't find that. And so I would think that we should strike the with approval by the city administrator from that paragraph as being out of alignment with Fremont Municipal Code 3705G. Then here comes the biggest concern that I have with regards to section 5-1-12. There's a reference here that animals are not allowed in the library unless they are therapy or service animals. And this one I'd like legal to pay close attention to. We don't have a definition in this manual of what a therapy animal constitutes. And we had quite a bit of discussion in the city code rewrite in, I think, section 6 with regards to animal control and therapy and service animals being defined. And we opted not to even follow federal guidance because it's in such a state of flux with regards to therapy animals. And my concern is that if we don't define that, if you're going to include that in 5-1-12, you probably need to define it so that legally you have recourse to ask someone to not stay because they don't meet the library's definition of therapy animal. And then that's where your job gets tough. What is the definition of therapy animal? So I think that particular subparagraph needs some work, or you just need to strike therapy animals and say it's a certified a service animal, and that would clean it up. But if you're going to allow therapy animals, I think you need to define it. Those are my comments. And so because of that, I really would prefer that we continue this item to the next meeting to sort those three items out. And certainly the interim library director and legal counsel can look at that last one, and you can look at the other two items to see which way that you might like to modify those. But I'd like to see this continue to the next meeting for approval so that we could entertain some modification to those three items.
I suggest you might want to continue 2 meetings. That way you can take it back. Laura can take it back to the library board.
2 meetings is fine as well. I just would like to give them adequate time to address the issues and see whether or not they're interested in making modifications.
Your reference in the second item to 705G, was that it? G as in 705G?
I think I wrote down 3705.
Yeah. That ends with, okay, yeah.
So I would have that motion to continue for 2 meetings out.
Councilman Jensen,
I will second that motion.
any other council discussion? Seeing none, cast your votes.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
I would take a motion to adjourn. Councilman Legban,
I make a motion, to adjourn.
Councilman Sukram,
I'll second that.
cast your votes to adjourn.
Motion carries 8-0, Mayor.
We are adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.